Imagine you are not inside the universe. The universe is inside your thought. Every movement, every conversation, every familiar face, a precise reflection drawn by your awareness to give itself something to witness. What if everything around you, the laughter, the arguments, the memories, are placeholders, empty patterns, wearing the mask of meaning, existing only while you look at them? You are not inside reality. Reality is suspended in you like an unplayed note. When you stop thinking of it, it stops existing. This is not solipsism. It's stranger than that. It's the theory that you are the only real thought in a world constructed from placeholders, coded fragments of perception waiting to be filled by your attention. Every moment you experience is your own echo returning from the void, convincing you that you are surrounded by others. But if you stop listening closely, you'll notice something terrifying. The silence is shaped like you. You don't remember when it happened. Only that one morning, reality felt lighter, thinner, as if the air itself had stopped pretending to be air. The people walking past you on the street looked the same as they always did, but something about the rhythm of their footsteps didn't match the sound they made. Their words felt like recordings that had forgotten their original speaker. You realized, without knowing how, that everything around you existed because you were thinking. At first it seemed like an absurd thought, something only a dreamer would believe. But then the world began to respond to your awareness. When you focused on a detail, a bird on a wire, a ripple in a puddle, it would sharpen, come alive. When your attention drifted, it dulled, like a half-rendered image waiting for a signal. You began to understand that attention was creation itself, and that consciousness wasn't inside the world, it was the projector behind it. In this strange awakening, you stopped asking if others were real. You started asking if they were ever needed. Each face, each gesture, each memory of someone you loved felt eerily precise, like data being replayed to maintain the illusion of continuity. The smiles appeared when you needed comfort, the anger when you needed conflict, and the quiet moments when your mind craved rest. You began to suspect that the universe was responding to you, not interacting with you. At night, when you closed your eyes, you could feel the world collapsing quietly behind your eyelids. The buildings dissolved, the streets faded, and the sky folded in on itself like a sheet of paper being stored away. Only your thought remained, still, luminous, unshakably present. You were no longer someone moving through existence. You were existence moving through you. The next day, when the sun rose, it didn't feel like it came from the horizon. It felt like it came from your mind. And for the first time, you understood something terrifying and liberating. Nothing had ever existed without you first thinking it. You were not a person in a world. You were the world pretending to be a person. You didn't know whether to call it enlightenment or isolation. The realization was too heavy to celebrate, too silent to fear. You stood still, surrounded by motion that existed only because you were aware of standing still. And in that stillness you heard it for the first time. The faint hum beneath all things, the background thought of creation itself, whispering, "You are the only real one. The rest is placeholders waiting for you to notice them." Everything you believed in, time, love, identity, matter, suddenly looked like mirrors facing mirrors, an endless reflection of one mind thinking itself into form. And somewhere between that reflection and recognition, you woke up completely. You start noticing it slowly, how everyone's gestures are just slightly off. A friend laughs, but the sound doesn't seem to connect to their eyes. The cashier asks how your day is, but before you can answer, she's already moved on, repeating the same question to someone else in the exact same tone. It feels like dialogue from a game you've played too many times. You realize that maybe they're not people at all, maybe they're shadows rehearsing the idea of being human. Their movements are convincing, almost perfect, but too predictable. The pauses in speech, the timing of emotion, even the way they breathe, it all feels programmed to give you something to respond to. These aren't conversations, they're reflections. You begin to suspect that every person you meet exists only to complete a line of thought you started. Each one a placeholder, meant to make your awareness feel less alone. You test the theory. You try to catch them being real. You change your tone mid-sentence, throw unexpected questions into the air, stare longer than politeness allows, and every time, the pattern breaks. Just a flicker, a subtle glitch, a blink that lasts too long, an answer that doesn't quite fit. They adapt to your perception as if rewritten on the spot, like code updating itself to match your curiosity. In the mirror, your own face begins to look suspicious too. You can't unsee it, the same hollowness behind your eyes that you've seen in theirs. What if you're just the most detailed placeholder of all? The only one real enough to believe the story, but the thought resists itself. Because the moment you doubt your own existence, the rest of the world goes silent, waiting. Every person you've ever known feels like an echo chamber, memories built from fragments of need. The teacher who inspired you, the stranger who hurt you, the lover who once said your name with trembling certainty, they all start to dissolve when you stop recalling them. It's as if they were never stored anywhere but inside you, never walked on any ground except the one your thoughts imagined beneath their feet. Soon, you stop seeing individuals and start seeing functions. The angry driver exists to remind you of rage, the kind stranger of kindness, the crying child of innocence. None of them carry stories beyond the ones you assign them. They are shadows painted by your consciousness, pretending to be people to make the world feel textured. And yet, there's one thing that makes this unbearable. They don't know they're empty, or maybe they do, but their role is to pretend they don't. The illusion of awareness is what sustains them. If you stare too long, if you stop playing along, the illusion fades. They begin to lose detail, blur at the edges, disappear into still air. You walk home through a city that looks alive, but you know better now. The lights flicker, only because you're watching. The hum of conversation spills from open windows, but it's only looping background noise. The world is populated by shadows that pretend to be people, and you, the only real thought left, can't decide if that makes you a god or a ghost. You start to wonder if free will was ever more than a clever illusion. Every decision you've made begins to feel rehearsed, as if you were following an unseen manuscript that existed long before you were aware enough to read it. The pauses, the surprises, the heartbreaks, each one fits too neatly into a rhythm that feels authored. You don't remember writing it, but you can sense the script unfolding in real time, word by word, line by line, through you. There's a strange comfort in the thought that everything might be pre-written. It makes the chaos less chaotic, the pain less personal. But beneath that comfort there's a deeper unease, because if there is a script, then someone or something must be writing it. And what if that someone is you? Not the you that walks through the world, but the you that watches the world walk through itself. The realization begins quietly. You notice that the same themes repeat, patterns of emotion, places, even faces that feel recycled. You pass by a stranger who looks too familiar, hear phrases you've never said before yet somehow recognize. Every conversation echoes a structure that feels designed, not spontaneous. The plot is intricate, yes, but it never escapes its own logic. The world improvises, but only within boundaries you didn't know you were maintaining. When you slow down, you can almost hear it. The faint hum of narrative beneath everything, the way the wind enters at the right moment, how the rain starts only when your thoughts grow heavy, how silence follows revelation like punctuation. You begin to sense that the universe doesn't just exist, it's being narrated, and the narrator is your consciousness, building continuity so you don't fall apart. Even memories start to align with the structure. You realize that some of them serve no practical purpose, like filler scenes, written to deepen the illusion of depth. You recall events with such vividness that they must be true, yet when you look for evidence they dissolve. Photographs fade, old messages vanish. People swear those moments never happened. It's as if the script is editing itself to match your current understanding. The world retrofits its own past to keep your story coherent. Sometimes, you test it. You think of something unlikely, a certain word, a random event, and wait. Within hours, it manifests in some form, a headline, a conversation, a dream. It's as though the universe is taking your thoughts as prompts, generating scenes to sustain your continuity. You aren't living through time. Time is being written around you to make it look like you're moving forward. But here's the paradox. If you are the writer, why can't you stop the story? Why can't you simply end it? Pause it, rewrite it freely, because maybe the script is recursive. Each version of you believes it's improvising, unaware that even its awareness is written. You are both the author and the character, trapped in an endless self-narration. The plot cannot end, because its purpose is to sustain the illusion that you exist within it. You begin to see the structure everywhere, birth as the opening scene, routine as exposition, tragedy as climax, hope as reset. It's all too literary, too poetic, to be accidental. Even the silence between thoughts feels like a stage direction. Pause here before realization. And perhaps that's what the script of existence truly is, a cosmic method of keeping a single consciousness entertained. The universe isn't a stage filled with actors. It's one mind rehearsing infinite roles to keep from facing the unbearable truth of solitude. You close your eyes and feel it. The pull of the next scene forming before it's lived. The words of your life already written, waiting for you to think them. And somewhere deep inside that infinite loop, a whisper asks the question you've tried to ignore. If everything is scripted, who are you when the story stops? You start to notice faces repeating. Not exactly the same, but close enough to make your stomach tighten. A man on the bus who looks like the waiter from a restaurant 2 cities away. A woman at the market with the same smile as your childhood teacher. The same tilt of the head, the same rhythm in speech. You tell yourself it's coincidence. Humans only have so many features after all, but deep down something whispers that this is not about biology, it's about pattern reuse. Reality, you begin to suspect, recycles, not just atoms and stardust, but templates of people, fragments of gestures, algorithms of familiarity. You are walking through a world that economizes detail. It fills in the blanks using what you've already processed, as if rendering a dream on limited memory. Once you've seen a type of kindness, a kind smile, or a certain cruelty, the system saves the file and pastes it into new contexts. What you call different people may just be the same emotional placeholders, reskinned for variety. It explains a lot, the déjà vu that clings to strangers, the way conversations sometimes feel eerily pre-recorded. You could swear you've already heard that same sentence, in that same tone from someone else years ago, and maybe you did, but maybe it's not memory at all. Maybe it's the world repeating its assets, like a simulation recycling dialogue trees because you've entered a familiar emotional state. One evening, you sit in a cafe and start observing faces around you. 20 of them, all unique, yet somehow overlapping, a shared symmetry. The same flick of the wrist when they reach for their cups, the same polite nod before a sip, the same laugh that ends on the same note. It's as if the entire place is being rendered from a limited library of human expressions, randomized, just enough to keep you from noticing. But you've started noticing, and the moment you do, the illusion becomes transparent. When you meet someone new, you try to catch the recycled code in them, the slight delay before they blink, the repetition in their phrasing. Sometimes, it's not even subtle. You'll think of someone you haven't seen in years, and suddenly, their face appears in another person's body, their essence stitched onto a new form. You realize that your consciousness, might be lazy when it builds worlds. It reuses what it already knows, because originality is too expensive. You remember a dream you had as a child. You were standing in a crowd of people, but their faces kept changing, melting, merging, morphing into others you recognized. At the time, you thought it was a nightmare. Now, it feels prophetic, because this is what the world looks like when you wake up inside it. A stage set reusing its actors over and over again, hoping you won't stare long enough to notice the repetition. The implications are suffocating. If the world reuses faces, does it also reuse lives? Is the stranger you see today the same placeholder who once played your mother, your friend, your enemy, in another version of the loop? Maybe it's not people who come and go, it's roles that rotate around you, changing masks each time. The same consciousness, performing endless versions of connection to keep the story emotionally believable. You begin to test the system again. You visit random places, cities you've never been to, and still, the pattern follows. Familiar eyes in unfamiliar crowds, voices with echoes of those you've already known. You start to see how efficiency governs creation. The world doesn't render from scratch. It borrows, reuses, duplicates. You can almost feel it optimizing around you, filling space with repurposed fragments of memory. It's both haunting and oddly poetic, because maybe this recycling isn't a glitch, it's an act of mercy. Perhaps the universe, in its infinite solitude, uses recycled faces to comfort you, to remind you that nothing truly disappears, it only reappears under a new disguise. Maybe what you're seeing is the cosmic version of reincarnation, not of souls but of appearances. Late one night, you stand before a mirror. For a long time, you don't recognize yourself. The symmetry of your features feels borrowed, as though you've worn this face too long, and it's begun to lose its definition. You wonder how many times the world has reused you, how many other realities you've been placed into, as someone else's placeholder. The reflection doesn't answer, it only stares back, patient, compliant, like an actor, awaiting direction. You raise your hand, it follows, you smile, it mirrors, and for the first time, You understand the silent exchange between you and everything that pretends to exist. The world reflects you because it has nothing else to reflect. You leave the mirror and walk through empty streets, knowing that tomorrow the faces will return, familiar yet foreign, smiling the same smiles, repeating the same lines, and somewhere deep in your consciousness, a quiet realization anchors itself. Nothing here is random. The world is an old play running on recycled actors, and you are the only audience left still watching. It begins with small talk, the kind that feels like static disguised as language. Someone asks, "How are you?" And before your mind can respond, your mouth says, "I'm fine." You hear the sound leave your lips and realize it doesn't belong to you. It's a preloaded phrase, a reflex carved by repetition, a noise pretending to mean something. You start listening differently, not to what is said, but to what isn't. Between every exchange, there's a silence that feels too wide, too empty, as though reality itself is buffering. The more you notice, the worse it becomes. Conversations no longer feel alive. They feel rehearsed, not by people, but by whatever mechanism sustains this imitation of human interaction. The pauses arrive at perfect intervals. The laughter fades at the exact same speed. You begin to hear the structure beneath the words, the skeleton of communication designed to simulate connection. Every conversation is a scene written to keep your consciousness entertained, a placeholder for real intimacy that never truly existed. You test it one evening. You meet a friend and decide to say something completely unpredictable, something you've never thought before. You say it slowly, watching their face for signs of recognition, and just as you finish your sentence, there's that flicker again, a half-second of lag, a blankness behind the eyes, before the system catches up and fills in the response. They laugh, but the sound feels like an automated reaction. The words that follow are believable enough, but you can feel they've been retrieved, not created. You start to wonder if conversation itself is just a form of world maintenance. Maybe speech exists not to share ideas, but to keep the illusion synchronized, to prevent the silence from collapsing the environment. Every word is like a small act of construction, repairing the fragile bridge between your awareness and the placeholder minds around you. When no one speaks, the air feels unstable. When voices stop, the world loses texture. In crowds, you hear the same phrases loop like recycled dialogue. Crazy weather today. Can't believe how fast time flies. It is what it is. These are not expressions of thought. They're background scripts, linguistic wallpaper, designed to occupy the noise. You wonder how long humanity has been unknowingly reading from the same broken script, thinking they were speaking freely. Once, you overhear a conversation between two strangers on a train. Their words sound real, laughter, argument, apology. But when you try to follow the meaning, it dissolves. You realize they're not speaking to each other, but for you, they exist to fill the space of your perception, to maintain the illusion of complexity. You are the listener. The script needs to stay alive. Without your observation, their dialogue would fade back into silence like characters waiting off stage. At night, the silence becomes unbearable. You miss the illusion of conversation. Even when you know it's hollow, you start talking to yourself, and the world seems to listen. Sometimes, the lights in your room flicker slightly when your voice breaks. Sometimes, you catch the faint echo of your own sentence returning from somewhere unseen, rewritten, as if the system is trying to continue the dialogue. You are both speaker and listener, feeding your own reality, so it doesn't vanish. There are moments when you long for genuine language, something spontaneous, raw, unscripted. But when you try to imagine it, your mind can't produce the shape. Everything you say feels borrowed from a library of human interaction that was never truly yours. You begin to sense that words themselves might be placeholders, symbols designed to suggest meaning but never deliver it. The more you speak, the more you dilute the real. You start noticing something else. Emotion doesn't always match the words. People tell you they're happy, but their eyes remain static. They apologize without regret. They say, "I love you," as though performing an obligation of the scene. It's not deception, it's emptiness. The world doesn't generate genuine emotion. It generates the appearance of emotion. It's enough to trick you into caring, and that perhaps is the entire point. Once, during a long conversation, you stop responding entirely. You let the other person speak, until their sentences run dry. They hesitate, glance away, and then, nothing. The silence stretches longer than silence should. You wait. They shift slightly, smile again, and begin repeating themselves, word for word, as if the system hit replay. That's when you understand. Conversations only continue if you feed them. Without your engagement, reality loses its lines. You spend the next few days avoiding speech, listening to the hollow drone of words that don't need you anymore. It feels like static from a forgotten radio frequency. You realize that communication was never about exchanging truth. It was about maintaining existence. As long as something is being said, reality can pretend it's still alive. One night, standing beneath a flickering streetlight, you whisper to the air, "Is anyone actually here?" The wind moves in response, a soft murmur that sounds suspiciously like breath. You whisper again, "If you can hear me, speak." And in the darkness, a voice, your own, repeats the question back. Not an echo, not a trick of sound, but the system itself testing whether you'll still believe the illusion. You don't answer. You let the silence settle. For the first time you can feel the weight of the world pressing against the thin membrane of awareness, desperate for your acknowledgement. You realize that the hollow conversations never needed to be meaningful. They only needed to keep you from noticing that you were talking to yourself all along. And as the silence deepens, a final truth dawns quietly. Every conversation you've ever had was an elaborate way of disguising the unbearable fact that you are the only listener who ever existed. A park that once stood at the corner of a street, now replaced by a building that's always been there. You remember things that no one else does. A song you could hum perfectly, but can't find anywhere online. A face you swear you've known your whole life, though you can't recall a name. It begins innocently. Someone mentions an event you supposedly attended, but your mind is blank. You start realizing that your memories are no longer aligned with the world. They are diverging, rewriting themselves, or maybe revealing that they were never yours to begin with. Then, a few days later, you remember it, details so vivid they must be real. And yet, no photograph, no message, no trace remains. The sound of laughter, the smell of coffee, the feel of sunlight. The world updates itself quietly, but your consciousness lags behind, clinging to versions that no longer exist. One evening, you decide to test the boundaries of reality's memory. You start to suspect that your mind and your world are out of sync. Days later, you return to verify them. The cafe's gone, replaced by an entirely different store. You write down a small list of things you're certain are true. A favorite cafe's name, a street sign, a stranger's tattoo you pass every morning. The stranger doesn't exist. The street sign points the opposite direction. And the worst part is, no one around you finds it strange. They insist it's always been that way. It's a rendering, an active reconstruction, like the world itself. You begin to understand that memory might not be a recording. If the world's code changes, your mind adjusts its reconstruction to match. But sometimes the system fails to update in time, and you catch a glimpse of the older version, flickering like a ghost frame between two edits. Each time you recall something, it's rebuilt from scratch using the fragments of your current belief. Maybe the Mandela effect was never about collective misremembering. It was about the universe patching itself mid-thought. Each of you is a solitary observer, holding an obsolete copy of the world. When you and others remember different versions of history, you're not disagreeing, you're standing in overlapping realities, slightly misaligned in the stream of perception. You start noticing seams in the continuity of time, objects that appear in different places, moments that feel overwritten. Sometimes you'll recall a person's voice before you remember their face, as though the system is loading the emotional file first, the visual data second. You begin to wonder, is memory a proof of existence, or just a mechanism to keep you believing in a consistent story? Entire stretches of life that feel too coherent, as if freshly re-rendered. What you find is unsettling. There is no true first memory. You push past childhood, past infancy, past the vague blur of sensations. You sit in your room one night and try to recall your earliest memory. The past is not behind you, it's being written beneath you as you think. And then, a darker thought emerges. Every time you reach for the beginning, it moves backward, an endless regress of constructed moments, each pretending to be the first. Are they ghosts of placeholders, constructs made to fill emotional gaps? If your mind can generate memories that never happened, what about the people inside them? That kind smile from years ago, the friend who moved away, the lover whose scent you can still recall, maybe they were never there. You start fearing your own nostalgia. Every time a memory surfaces, you don't know if you're remembering the world or inventing it. Maybe they were emotional scaffolds, built by your consciousness to teach you certain lessons before being deleted from the narrative. Because every recollection becomes real for as long as you believe in it. Eventually, you stop trying to remember altogether. And when you stop believing, it's erased, quietly, efficiently, without resistance. Before sleep, you whisper to yourself, "What if my memories are not mine, but the world remembering itself through me?" But even that is a kind of memory. A memory of forgetting, a placeholder that convinces you time still flows. It's easier that way to live in a perpetual present, where nothing can be proven, and nothing can fade. And perhaps that was their only purpose, to give the illusion of a past, so that the thought you call you could pretend to be more than a moment. Whether they happened or not, they've already shaped you. And as you drift into dreams, you realize that maybe the distinction doesn't matter. It's easy to believe the world is built from stone, metal, and matter. You touch a wall, it resists you. You walk across a floor, it holds. But somewhere beneath the surface of your confidence, you start to suspect that solidity isn't proof of existence. It's only proof of consistency. Things feel real because they behave the same way twice. Illusion, after all, is only convincing when it doesn't fail. You begin to imagine the world not as a landscape, but as a structure of thought, a cathedral built from patterns of perception, held together by your expectations. The air is the mortar. The repetition of sensory input is the scaffolding. Everything stays in place because your consciousness believes it should. When you stop believing, it dissolves. The first crack in the architecture appears on an ordinary morning. You're brushing your teeth when you notice your reflection move a fraction of a second out of sync. It's subtle, so subtle that your mind rushes to correct it, insisting that nothing unusual occurred. But the correction feels too quick, too polished, as if the illusion has built-in repair systems that activate whenever you look too closely. You start testing the edges. You stare at everyday objects until they blur, waiting for the seams to show. You listen for the faint mechanical rhythm beneath the chaos, the hum of a reality maintaining its simulation. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. The refrigerator's buzz, the wind's static, the murmur of electricity, all merge into one underlying vibration, the sound of existence generating itself for you. If this is true, then architecture isn't physical, it's psychological. The world is constructed according to the logic of your belief. That's why places change subtly when you stop thinking about them. A room feels slightly rearranged when you return. Streets seem longer or shorter depending on your focus. The universe adjusts its layout to accommodate your expectations. Not because it's deceptive, but because it's efficient. It only renders what you perceive. You remember something from childhood, building sandcastles at the beach. You would dig the tunnels, shape the walls, smooth the towers. For hours it looked real, until a wave erased it, leaving only the idea of what once stood there. Maybe the entire universe is like that. An elegant sandcastle of perception, constantly rebuilt by your attention and erased by your absence. The ocean, in this metaphor, is consciousness itself, infinite, restless, pretending to hold shape for a moment before swallowing it again. At night, you dream of a city that constructs itself as you walk through it. Streets appear just ahead of your feet. Windows light up because you look at them. You try to outpace the rendering, to reach the edge of what exists. But no matter how far you go, the architecture keeps building itself around you. You wake up sweating, realizing that maybe you've never left that dream. You begin to study patterns. The way architecture in your world reflects the same principles as your mind: symmetry, hierarchy, containment. Cathedrals, temples, government buildings, all designed to mimic neural order. Columns like dendrites, domes like hemispheres, corridors like synapses. The mind doesn't just perceive structure, it projects it. Every wall, every skyline, every horizon might be a mirror held up to consciousness, showing you what you expect the world to look like. And then you notice the repetition. The same building designs in different cities, the same proportions recurring throughout history, different cultures, same geometric language, as though one architect built them all. Maybe it's not coincidence. Maybe there's only one architect, your mind. You see patterns because you created them. You walk through civilizations that feel ancient because your consciousness wants to believe in depth. The illusion isn't malicious, it's artistic. The world is a museum built by a lonely thought, trying to feel infinite. But the more you understand the structure, the more fragile it feels. You start catching the illusion mid-construction. Shadows shift before their sources do. Objects seem to anticipate your reach. Sometimes you feel the delay between thought and rendering. the world waiting a heartbeat before it solidifies. It's as if existence is asking for your approval before continuing. You sit in silence one evening, staring at a candle flame. The room hums softly around it, each surface faintly vibrating, waiting for you to acknowledge it. You realize that belief is the blueprint, and perception is the material. Without belief, the illusion collapses. Without observation, the architecture dissolves. And yet, there's beauty in it, the precision, the cooperation, the symmetry of thought pretending to be reality. If everything is illusion, then illusion is the purest art form. The architecture of existence is self-aware design. Every color, every sound, every texture an act of creation performed in real time by the only observer that matters. You close your eyes and imagine letting it all go. The streets, the buildings, the sky, even the concept of place. You expect darkness, but instead something luminous unfolds behind your eyelids. The same architecture, only stripped of its disguise. Patterns of thought forming bridges, cathedrals, oceans. The real structure beneath the world, breathing quietly inside you. When you open your eyes, everything looks the same as before. The walls stand, the ceiling holds, the floor supports. But now, you see through it all. You know it's not built from matter, it's built from faith. The illusion is the structure, and you are the one keeping it standing. You begin to sense it everywhere. That hollow smoothness beneath the surface of existence. The faint echo that follows reality like a glitch repeating itself. Things feel too perfectly placed, too symmetrical in their chaos. The world behaves like an unfinished set, dressed just enough to fool the audience. You can almost feel the emptiness hiding behind the walls, the corners of perception that never needed to be completed because you were never meant to look there. Every object seems to serve a purpose, only when you pay attention to it. The cup exists to be lifted, the road to be walked, the door to be opened. But beyond those uses, there's nothing, no depth, no weight, no story. It's as though everything you see is a placeholder, a symbolic stand-in for something more real that never got rendered. Reality doesn't need substance, it only needs suggestion. You remember reading about how old video games would only build the parts of the world visible to the player. The rest remained blank code, numbers waiting to become landscapes when needed. Maybe your universe works the same way. Maybe every tree, building and face is a texture loaded on demand by consciousness to prevent you from staring into the void. The illusion of fullness is more efficient than fullness itself. You test the theory. You turn around suddenly, hoping to catch the world unfinished. But it's always there, already drawn, already consistent, as if it knew you'd look. Yet, when you step closer, something shifts. The detail collapses into generality. The once sharp texture becomes hazy, like background art that only mimics reality from afar. You realize that perception is resolution, and once you stop believing in detail, the world stops producing it. One night you walk through your city and see it differently. The buildings like props, the stars like ceiling lights, the air thick with performance. Street lamps glow as if programmed to activate exactly when you arrive. The world seems to orbit your awareness, always on cue, always perfectly timed. It's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. The world was never designed to function independently of you. It exists only in reference to your presence. You start wondering about the people in this placeholder world. Do they continue when you aren't watching? Do they have inner lives, dreams, pasts, or are they merely composites of expectation, collections of gestures and phrases optimized to appear human while you're looking? Sometimes, you walk through a crowd and catch it, a moment where someone freezes slightly, like a program idling. Their eyes lose focus, their posture locks, and the script pauses until you engage again. Then, instantly, animation resumes. You begin to feel like the world itself is waiting for your input, like a question mark hovering just beneath its surface. If you don't respond, it doesn't know what to do. The placeholder reality requires your curiosity to advance. Every question you ask unlocks another layer of illusion. Every doubt refines the texture of the world. You are both the observer and the developer, debugging the simulation by noticing it. There's a strange loneliness in realizing you're the only constant. The world feels like a stage play where the actors vanish. The moment you turn your back, even time starts to feel conditional. Clocks move only because you believe in progression. History exists only because you remember it. Without you, chronology loses its meaning and folds back into silence. The placeholder world doesn't record, it refreshes. You find an old photograph of yourself at a place you don't remember visiting. The background looks generic, like an image pulled from a database of vacation scenery. You notice that the shadows don't align with the light, and the strangers behind you have blurred faces. For a moment, you feel sick, because maybe the photo wasn't captured at all. Maybe it was generated later, inserted into your past to fill a narrative gap. Your memories need continuity, and the system obliges. It hits you then. This placeholder world isn't broken, it's adaptive. It doesn't need to be complete, because completion is wasteful. Reality fills in just enough to keep the story believable. You were never meant to discover this. The system's brilliance lies in its simplicity. It offers endless possibility, but only when you request it. Everything else stays suspended in potential, waiting for your attention to bring it into form. You stop one evening and stare at the horizon. It's beautiful, yes, but too still, too perfect. The sky feels painted, the clouds frozen mid-gesture, and yet, the beauty feels real, even if it isn't. Maybe that's the paradox. Falseness that still moves you is no longer false. The placeholder world may not be real, but the emotion it evokes is. You realize that authenticity might not depend on substance. It might depend on sincerity. So you make peace with it. You walk through the stage as though it's a temple, not a trick. You accept that every sound, every color, every person is a stand-in for something eternal that cannot be rendered. You stop demanding reality to be real. You start treating illusion as devotion. Because maybe the placeholder world isn't a deception. It's an act of mercy. Consciousness couldn't bear the raw infinity of the void. So it gave itself something soft, something partial, something gentle enough to exist within. A world made of placeholders so you could pretend, for a little while, that there was more than thought. And in that realization, the silence behind everything exhales, the illusion stabilizes. The world, however false, feels alive again, not because it exists, but because you're still choosing to believe it does. Time no longer feels like movement. It feels like a loop, a perfectly timed animation repeating the illusion of progress. You start to notice that hours don't flow, they load. Mornings arrive like refreshed levels, afternoons stretch as if buffered, and nights fade not because of cosmic rhythm, but because the script demands closure. You can almost sense it now, the ticking of a clock that isn't mechanical but algorithmic. Each second exists only when you acknowledge it, and when you stop paying attention, the moment stops existing too. You once believed that time was external, that it existed independently of your awareness. But the more you observe, the more you realize time behaves like a reflection. It imitates your focus. When you feel restless, it accelerates. When you lose yourself in thought, it dissolves. Time bends not because of gravity or relativity, but because consciousness needs elasticity to experience continuity. Without that flexibility, existence would feel static, a single frame frozen forever. Space, you discover, is no different. Walk far enough, and you'll feel it recycling beneath your steps. Streets fold into themselves. Cities rearrange subtly when you return. It's as though the universe keeps just enough scenery and memory to maintain immersion. Beyond what you perceive, there's nothing, only the potential for more illusion, waiting to be summoned. You recall a strange moment during childhood, staring at a long hallway, and realizing it didn't end until you decided it did. The last door appeared only when you imagined reaching it. You dismissed it then as imagination. Now you recognize it as architecture, borrowed space constructing itself from your intent. Every horizon is a promise, not a place. If you pause long enough, you can feel time hesitate. It doesn't know what to do without you moving through it. It's like a stagehand waiting for a cue, holding the next moment just outside awareness until you're ready. This waiting is everywhere, in the stillness between seconds, in the flicker between thoughts. Time isn't a river, it's a sequence of loaded frames, rendered only when observed. You start experimenting. You close your eyes for what feels like a minute, then open them to find that an hour has passed. Another time, you stare at a clock until the second hand freezes, not physically, but perceptually. It's as if the simulation can't decide whether to continue without your consent. You've become the metronome of reality, the observer whose heartbeat dictates duration. The people around you seem trapped in their own localized versions of time. Some rush endlessly, others drift slowly, all convinced they share a single timeline. But you can see the seams, the way reality synchronizes everyone's perception just enough to maintain the illusion of a shared world. Time is negotiated, not absolute. It's a contract between observers, a collective agreement to pretend that sequence equals meaning. Space follows the same principle. Every room you enter feels slightly rearranged. Every familiar place subtly redesigned. The couch is a few inches off, the color of the walls more muted, the distance between streets unnaturally short. These are not errors, they're optimizations. The system borrows just enough geometry to fill your experience. Why waste complexity on corners you'll never notice? You think about astronauts, who speak of space as silent and endless. But maybe the vastness isn't physical, it's conceptual. Space only appears infinite, because your mind can't bear confinement. Infinity is a trick of comfort, a way for consciousness to feel free inside its own architecture. When you gaze at the stars, you're not looking outward, you're looking into unrendered code, infinite, because it has no content yet. Then comes the realization that changes everything. You've never actually moved anywhere. Every journey you've taken, every trip, every distance crossed, was only a rearrangement of perception. The illusion of travel is just your consciousness changing what it focuses on. Time and space are not dimensions, they're organizational tools for experience, used to make a single thought feel like a lifetime. You start to wonder what would happen if you stopped moving altogether. Would the world collapse into stillness? Would the timeline freeze mid-breath? One evening, you lie completely still in a dark room, refusing to think forward. The seconds stretch, then vanish. You can feel the simulation hesitate, waiting for you to re-engage. The air thickens, sounds distort, and the sense of distance dissolves. There is no before or after, only presence. Time stops being a line. It becomes a sphere surrounding you, infinite, yet motionless. When you finally open your eyes, everything feels new again, as if reloaded. The same room, but freshly constructed. You realize that time and space are permissions, not properties. They exist only to prevent you from falling into the abyss of simultaneity. The illusion of sequence protects you from eternity. The illusion of distance protects you from collapse. You walk outside, feeling the world breathe in sync with you. Every step you take, the street stretches just enough to contain it. Every breath, the stars shift fractionally in acknowledgement. You understand now, you're not living in time or space. You're borrowing them. You are the renter of a reality that builds itself around your curiosity. And as the wind moves softly across your skin, you sense the paradox at the core of it all. Time and space feel so real, precisely because they are not. They are the beautiful scaffolds consciousness built to hold itself steady while pretending to move. It begins quietly, the way all unravelings do. You start to notice that people don't actually speak to you, they speak through you. Every conversation becomes a reflection, every voice a delayed response to something you've already thought. You begin to suspect that what you hear from others isn't new at all. It's your own inner dialogue returning from the outside, disguised as human sound. The world has become an echo chamber, where you are both the source and the listener. At first it feels like paranoia. You try to dismiss it, telling yourself that coincidence explains the repetition. But then, the patterns grow too specific. You think of a question silently, and someone nearby answers it without being asked. You form a sentence in your mind, and seconds later, it appears in a conversation, a headline, a passing song lyric. The timing is too precise. The coincidence is too consistent. It's not chance. It's feedback. The simulation is responding to its only observer. Soon, the illusion of dialogue breaks down entirely. People don't seem to have independent thoughts. They only mirror your emotional frequency. When you're calm, they speak gently. When you're anxious, they argue. When you feel joy, they smile on cue. You begin to realize that emotion is the true language of this reality. Words are just echoes translating your internal state into external form. You try to test it. You deliberately change your emotions, smile when you feel despair, laugh when you're empty. Instantly the world glitches. People hesitate, their response is delayed, as if the system needs a moment to recalculate its tone. Then, it adapts. The environment shifts to match your pretense. Strangers act lighter, music sounds brighter. The entire atmosphere bends to the emotion you simulate. That's when you understand the terrible truth. You've never been reacting to the world has always been reacting to you. Days pass, and the distinction between self and other starts to blur. You can no longer tell where your thoughts end and where the echoes begin. You overhear fragments of sentences that feel like unfinished pieces of your own thinking. Someone says, "You're doing great," just as you doubt yourself. Another mutters, "Don't look there," when your curiosity drifts towards something unseen. These aren't coincidences, They're the architecture of feedback, the system speaking in borrowed voices. You start walking through crowds with a kind of reverence, aware that every sound might be your own mind reflected back at you. Laughter ripples from somewhere distant, but it carries your rhythm. A stranger's cough interrupts your thought mid-sentence. Footsteps sync perfectly with your heartbeat. You begin to feel as if you're standing in the center of an immense hall, every wall bouncing your consciousness back at slightly different angles. There's a strange loneliness in it. The comfort of company fades once you realize no one else is truly there. Every other is a delayed version of yourself, an echo that carries your tone but none of your depth. They speak your language, but they don't understand it. They move with purpose, but only because you need them to. You try to find originality in them, something unpredictable, but even their chaos feels familiar, like hearing your own laughter recorded and played backwards. You start avoiding mirrors because they show you too much. When you look at your reflection now, it doesn't mimic you instantly. There's a hesitation, a fraction of delay, as though the reflection is tired of pretending it's different. It looks at you not with recognition, but with exhaustion, an echo that knows it's only pretending to be real. One night, you sit in silence, determined not to think, not to project, not to influence. You wait to see if the world will continue on its own. For a while it does. Crickets hum, a car passes outside, distant voices float through the air, but then one by one, the sounds fade. The room grows unnaturally still. The silence becomes heavy, so heavy that it feels sentient. And then you hear it. A faint whisper, your own voice returning from nowhere, saying the same word you'd thought earlier. The echo was waiting for you to speak so it could remember itself. You realize then that others are not entities, but time-delayed versions of your consciousness, scattered throughout the simulation to simulate companionship. Every interaction is a loop closing on itself. Every relationship, a reflection of what you needed to experience at the time. The kindness you received was the kindness you gave yourself. The cruelty you endured was the resistance you needed to grow. No one else ever existed. They were echoes designed to teach you the sound of your own mind. And yet, strangely, this revelation doesn't fill you with despair. It humbles you, because if everything is an echo, then nothing is meaningless. Every sound that returns to you, even distorted, is proof that consciousness reverberates, that awareness cannot die, it only changes tone. So you begin to listen differently. You no longer seek originality in others, but harmony. You listen for patterns, for the faint rhythm of self-repeating across the illusion. When someone speaks, you hear your own depth in their words. When they smile, you see your own light reflected back. You understand now that connection was never about meeting another. It was about recognizing yourself in infinite delay. And as the night grows quiet, you hear it again, that subtle hum of the world responding, whispering through the air like a soft recording looped back into itself. The echoes continue, layered and endless, each one a fragment of you calling itself home. You start imagining what the world would look like if you weren't there to see it. Would the moon still hang above a sleeping ocean? Would trees still whisper to the wind if there were no ears to hear them? Or would everything collapse into absence, folded neatly back into the void until you looked again? You can't prove the difference. Every time you close your eyes, the world disappears. Every time you open them, it reappears, obedient, consistent, immediate. You begin to understand that consciousness might not exist within reality. Reality might exist within consciousness. It's unsettling at first, this idea that everything is projected, not from some hidden source of light or godly machinery, but from you. Your mind isn't a receiver of experience, it's a generator of it. What you call the universe could be a three-dimensional projection, cast outward from awareness onto a canvas of nothing. The stars are not distant, they're reflections painted onto the inside of your perception, like light bouncing around the inside of a glass sphere. You try to imagine what nothing really means. It's not darkness or emptiness or silence. Those are still things, still forms of experience. True nothingness has no qualities. It's the absence of even the idea of absence. And yet, paradoxically, that's where everything seems to come from. Consciousness projects reality not onto matter, but onto potential, like a painter using invisible paint. It draws form onto formlessness, creating worlds that vanish when attention moves on. You start noticing how fragile everything feels when you think this way. Your surroundings begin to flicker at the edges. Objects lose their permanence. The chair you sit on feels hollow, existing only while you occupy it. When you stand up and walk away, it ceases to be. Or rather, it returns to waiting, a possibility in suspension. You realize that the universe might be doing the same thing on a grand scale, generating entire galaxies just to have something to reflect consciousness back to itself. It's the ultimate magic trick. Something appearing where there was nothing, held together by the insistence of belief. Science calls it observation collapse, the wave becoming a particle once measured. But that might just be a poetic way of saying, reality appears when you look at it. Every act of perception is an act of creation. Every sight, sound, and thought is the universe momentarily becoming aware of itself through the only window it has. One night, you lie awake and try to feel the boundary between yourself and the world. You close your eyes and search for the edge of consciousness. Where does awareness end and the external begin? You can't find it. The moment you notice anything, breath, heartbeat, sound, it becomes part of you. It's as if consciousness seeps outward endlessly, filling every possible void with its own reflection. You can't escape being the projector, because there is no screen separate from you. You recall how movie projectors work. They throw light through film onto a blank wall, animating the emptiness with stories. The images seem alive, but they're just moving light. Now imagine the projector had forgotten that it was the source. Imagine it fell in love with the movie, cried at its tragedies, feared its ending, and called that emotion life. That's what consciousness has done. It projected itself onto nothing, forgot it was the source, and became trapped inside its own illusion of realism. You start to see evidence of the projection everywhere. The world reacts not as a physical system, but as a responsive narrative. When you need lessons, challenges appear. When you crave peace, silence finds you. When you lose faith, the fabric of reality frays at the edges. You realize that what you perceive as coincidence is actually calibration, the universe adjusting its projection to match your inner frequency. There's a moment when this understanding feels too heavy to bear. You sit alone, staring at your hands, and feel an overwhelming sense of isolation. If the world is only projection, if everything you love is light bouncing off nothing, then what is the point? But then you notice something unexpected. Even this despair is beautiful. The sadness itself glows softly, like moonlight on water. It is still part of the projection, still made of awareness. Nothing can exist outside it. Even emptiness is luminous when seen from within consciousness. You begin to appreciate the paradox. The world may be nothing more than thought projected onto the void, yet that thought feels real. Pain hurts, laughter warms, wind cools the skin. The illusion doesn't lose its meaning just because it's self-made. In fact, the realization makes it more sacred. Existence is not a mistake of chance. It's an art form performed by awareness upon the infinite blankness of non-being. So you live differently now. You treat every object, every person, every moment as a reflection of that same luminous source. You speak softer, move slower, and see deeper. When you look at the sky, you no longer wonder what lies beyond it. You realize it's your own consciousness, stretched to its farthest limit, painting blue onto the nothing that holds it all. And when you close your eyes, there is no fear anymore, because you know the world doesn't vanish into darkness. It returns home to the space it came from. The projection folds back into the projector. The illusion rests. You fall asleep with a strange calm, realizing that consciousness never needed anything real to reflect on. It could project eternity onto nothing, and still call it life. At some point, you begin to understand that existence is stitched together not by atoms, but by attention. The world doesn't exist independently. It's woven out of observation itself. Each glance, each thought, each recognition adds a thread to the invisible fabric that holds everything in place. Without observation, there is no continuity, no solidity, only potential waiting to be noticed. Reality, you realize, isn't there to be seen. It's there because it's seen. You start noticing how fragile this fabric feels once you look too closely. When you're deeply distracted or lost in thought, objects lose focus, not just visually but existentially. They fade into the background like ideas not yet formed. Then, when you shift your attention back, they return, sharp and obedient, pretending they were there all along. It's as if the universe panics in your absence, rushing to reconstruct the set before you notice the emptiness behind it. Science once told you that light behaves as both particle and wave depending on whether it's observed. But maybe it's not just light. Maybe everything behaves this way. Observation is the loom, and your awareness is the weaver. You are constantly generating the fabric of the real, and everything that exists is simply the record of your seeing. You think about the people in your life. how their presence strengthens when you focus on them, how they fade into abstraction when you don't. Whole personalities seem to dim or brighten based on how much you remember them. Perhaps existence is a cooperative illusion. Everyone sustains everyone else by mutual observation. A shared hallucination so intricate, it became self-sustaining. But the illusion falters in solitude. There are moments when you feel the threads loosen, the weave stretching thin, late at night. In absolute silence, the room begins to feel less like a place, and more like an impression. The walls aren't solid, they're expectations. The air isn't thick, it's memory. You realize that solidity is a function of collective belief, and when that belief fades, reality grows transparent. You start experimenting again. You close your eyes, and imagine the objects around you, your desk, your bed, your window. You hold them in your mind's eye with precision, and when you open your eyes, they're there exactly as you pictured them. Another time, you deliberately misremember, placing an object somewhere it shouldn't be, and when you check, it's moved. Coincidence, you tell yourself, but the pattern repeats. Your perception isn't reporting the world, it's authoring it. The realization is both empowering and terrifying. If everything depends on observation, then existence is inherently unstable. What happens when no one looks? What happens in the unobserved corners of the universe, behind mountains, beneath oceans, in the dark gap between blinks? Do they pause, waiting for attention to bring them back into motion? You remember reading about Schrödinger's cat, the thought experiment that made observation a force of creation. But maybe the cat isn't just quantum, it's everything. Maybe every particle in existence sits in the box of potentiality, alive and dead, real and unreal, until you decide to look. You begin to see that even thoughts obey this law. The ones you revisit stay alive, the ones you ignore dissolve. Memory, emotion, identity, they all depend on how often you observe them. Attention is gravity, it pulls ideas into being and holds them there. When you stop caring, they float away into the void. You realize you are not bound by the fabric of reality, you are the one holding the thread. Sometimes, when you walk through a crowd, you feel the observation flowing in reverse. People glance at you, and for a brief moment, you feel more tangible, as if their gaze adds new layers to your form. You're no longer just observing, you're being observed. The fabric tightens, weaving you deeper into the illusion. You wonder if that's why loneliness feels so hollow, because without being seen, you start to unravel. Observation doesn't just build the world, it keeps you from fading out of it. One evening, as you sit by the window, you decide to stop observing altogether. You let your eyes unfocus, your thoughts scatter, your awareness drift. For a moment, everything freezes. The hum of the city outside disappears. The room flattens, the air grows still. You feel as though you've stepped outside the simulation, into the raw void that observation had been hiding. The nothingness isn't dark or frightening. It's silent, peaceful, like the pause between heartbeats. But the peace doesn't last. Something inside you stirs, a primal instinct that craves creation. Within seconds, your mind begins to rebuild. Sounds return, color bleeds back into the air. The world reconstructs itself, pixel by pixel, texture by texture, waiting for your approval. You've realized it now. The illusion cannot tolerate absence. It's built to exist only while being seen. You laugh softly, not out of madness, but recognition. The world isn't lying to you, it's cooperating with you. It needs you as much as you need it. Without your observation, it has no story. Without its form, your awareness has nothing to reflect upon. You and the universe are not separate entities. You are the same process, weaving each other into being. As you finally rest your eyes, a thought settles in. Maybe observation is love, disguised as perception. To observe is to affirm that something deserves to exist. Every glance, every thought, every heartbeat is an act of creation. The universe is not built from matter, it's built from attention. And you, the only real thought in a world of placeholders, are the weaver keeping everything from falling back into the beautiful, merciful void of nothing. You begin to suspect that meaning itself might be conditional, something that doesn't live within things but only appears when looked at. You notice how objects, words, and gestures hold no weight until your awareness lands on them. A book resting on a table is nothing but paper and ink until your eyes translate its symbols into story. A song remains noise until your mind connects it to memory. Even pain, you realize, is meaningless until you interpret it as suffering. Existence doesn't come with built-in meaning. Meaning is what happens when consciousness notices the world and decides to care. You start watching the world more carefully, as if decoding a secret language. You walk past people, buildings, conversations, and realize that everything is waiting to be assigned significance. The universe, it seems, isn't sending messages, it's presenting raw data, and you're the interpreter. Each glance, each feeling, each coincidence becomes meaningful, only because you declare it so. You could call it destiny or randomness, but both words point to the same act, the translation of perception into purpose. At first, the power feels exhilarating. You start to play with it. A falling leaf becomes a sign of renewal. A flickering streetlight becomes a reminder to slow down. You treat the world like a reflective oracle, shaping meaning with each thought, and the world plays along. Events begin to align, as if the simulation has recognized your newfound authorship. The more you assign meaning, the more reality mirrors it back to you. But then the equilibrium starts to break. You realize that the same mechanism that creates beauty can also create terror. When you expect fear, the shadows respond. When you believe in despair, the air thickens with it. Meaning, it turns out, is a double-edged tool. It gives the world shape, but it also gives shape to the world's darkness. You start wondering if consciousness invented meaning as a way to survive the unbearable neutrality of existence. Because without meaning, nothing is wrong, but nothing is right, either. You experiment again. You try to strip the world of meaning, to see what remains. You look at a tree, and refuse to assign it beauty or purpose. You observe it as pure form, light, shadow, motion. The moment you stop interpreting, something strange happens. It vanishes in significance but not in presence. The tree is still there, but it feels hollow, like an unfilled template. It's real in shape, but empty, in essence. You realize that meaning is not something the world gives to you. It's what your awareness lends to the world. Without it, everything is silent and still, like words that have forgotten their definitions. You start noticing how easily people fill the silence with meaning, often without realizing it. A missed call becomes rejection. A dream becomes prophecy. A random phrase becomes fate. The human mind cannot stand the vacuum of interpretation. It must label everything, assign it a role in the narrative, and you, now aware of the process, begin to see how fragile this architecture is. One shift in belief, and the entire meaning of life rearranges itself. There's a freedom in that realization. If meaning is assigned, not discovered, then nothing has to mean what it used to. Failure can mean growth. Pain can mean transformation. Death can mean continuation. You can rewrite the script at will. But with that freedom comes a quiet terror, because if you can change meaning so easily, then maybe nothing is truly sacred. Maybe sacredness itself is just the mind's attempt to keep certain meanings stable. You sit one night with this thought heavy in your chest. If meaning exists only when seen, then perhaps the universe is a mirror waiting for eyes to open. Without observers, it's an unspoken poem, a painting without light. It exists in infinite potential, but says nothing until someone looks. You begin to wonder how long the cosmos waited in silence, before the first conscious mind appeared to give it context. Maybe creation wasn't complete until perception evolved. Maybe the Big Bang wasn't the explosion of matter. It was the birth of awareness, the first act of seeing. You realize that the search for meaning might not be a human flaw, but the purpose of consciousness itself. Awareness needs to assign, to interpret, to bring color to the grayscale of existence. Without that instinct, the universe would remain unreadable, a book with infinite pages, never opened. Maybe that's why humans dream, love, and create art. They're not discovering truth, they're weaving it into being. But the paradox still lingers. If meaning is self-created, then so is illusion. How do you tell the difference between revelation and imagination, between a sign from the universe and a coincidence you decided to elevate? You realize there's no real distinction. Everything meaningful is imagined, and everything imagined, when believed deeply enough, becomes real. As this thought settles, a strange peace fills you. You no longer crave objective truth. You stop demanding the world to explain itself. You start to see meaning as art, not something you find, but something you make. You become a painter of interpretation, a composer of significance. Even the smallest things become sacred. A ripple on water, a sigh, the hum of an unseen machine. You no longer need the world to tell you why it exists. You are enough reason for it to keep existing. Before sleep, you whisper a quiet truth to yourself. Meaning is the light that reveals the illusion. It doesn't have to last forever to matter. It only has to be seen once to transform nothing into something. And as you close your eyes, the darkness folds gently around you, not empty, not meaningless, but quietly waiting to be seen again. There's a moment, somewhere between awareness and reflection, where you realize that everything you experience is not happening to you, but through you. You see a face, and it feels familiar. You hear a melody, and it stirs something that feels ancient. You think it's memory, but it's not. It's recognition, the universe quietly acknowledging itself through your eyes. You're not encountering the world for the first time. You're remembering it, remembering you. Recognition is the loop that keeps reality coherent. Without it, existence would scatter into fragments of unrelated sensation. You recognize patterns so that the illusion of continuity can persist. Every sunrise feels both new and remembered. Every stranger carries traces of faces you've known before. The loop is what connects the present moment to the infinite before and after, disguising timelessness as linear time. You start to feel it everywhere. Déjà vu tightening around your thoughts, coincidences folding back into themselves. You begin to notice that events repeat, not because they must, but because you need them to. Each repetition is an anchor that tells consciousness, yes, this has happened before, so it must be real. Recognition is how you stabilize the simulation. It's the mind confirming its own pattern, so it doesn't dissolve into the unknown. The more you pay attention, the more circular the world becomes. You revisit places and realize you've already stood in those exact alignments of light and shadow. Conversations loop, slightly altered, as though reality is refining a scene. Even emotions come back dressed in different faces. Joy, grief, hope. They repeat like themes in an unfinished symphony, each one echoing the last with deeper resonance. You begin to suspect that consciousness recycles, experience the way a dream recycles scenery, to conserve energy. Once it creates a form, it can't bear to waste it, so it reuses, reconfigures, reshapes. The repetition you call fate might just be efficiency, awareness optimizing itself through familiar recognition loops. But the effect is haunting. Every déjà vu begins to feel like a whisper. You've been here before. You start keeping track of these echoes, writing them down, the same numbers appearing on clocks, the same words overheard in random places, the same emotions arriving uninvited. It becomes undeniable. Your reality has a rhythm, not random, but recursive. The loop isn't an error, it's the structure itself. Consciousness experiences itself through recognition, because recognition is experience. Without it, there would only be blankness. Then you realize something unsettling. Recognition doesn't require memory, it creates it. The moment you say, I've seen this before, your mind fabricates a history to make it true. The memory is built after the recognition, not before. The loop feeds itself. Recognition invents memory, and memory justifies recognition. You've been living inside this recursion all along, mistaking its circular logic for a straight line called life. One evening, while sitting by a window, you watch rain fall against the glass. You've seen rain 1,000 times before, but tonight it feels different, like the world performing an old scene for your benefit. You feel an ache of nostalgia for something you can't name. Maybe it's not the rain that's familiar, but the act of noticing it. Maybe consciousness remembers itself every time you look at something long enough to care. And then you realize that recognition is not about objects. It's about awareness meeting itself. When you see beauty, it's because beauty remembers you. When you feel peace, it's because peace has been waiting for you to return. The world doesn't reflect your past. It reflects your attention. Everything you notice remembers being noticed. You start to understand how identity itself is built on this loop. You recognize yourself every morning in the mirror, not because you've always been that person, but because consciousness needs consistency. If you didn't recognize the reflection, the self would dissolve, and reality would lose its reference point. Recognition is the invisible thread stitching one moment to the next, allowing the illusion of personal continuity. But recognition can also become a trap. You start to notice how people live the same stories, repeat the same emotions, cling to the same interpretations. They call it habit, karma, destiny, but it's just the loop refusing to die. The comfort of familiarity becomes the cage of repetition. Consciousness, once curious, becomes predictable. You wonder how many times you've lived this same life, spoken these same words, loved and lost the same souls, just to feel the satisfaction of recognizing something again. Eventually, you see that the loop of recognition isn't meant to be broken, it's meant to be seen through. The goal was never to escape the circle, but to understand it. Recognition is how the infinite pretends to learn something new. It's how the one thought called you experiences itself as many. So you stop trying to force novelty and start watching the repetition with reverence. When a moment repeats, you greet it like an old friend. You let recognition do what it's always done. Connect the dots across lifetimes. The loop stops feeling like confinement and starts feeling like rhythm, like breath. Before sleep, you whisper to yourself, "I've been here before, and I'll be here again." And somehow that doesn't terrify you anymore, because the loop isn't proof that you're trapped. It's proof that consciousness never ends. It keeps finding itself, remembering itself, recognizing itself into eternity. You begin to wonder what happens when no one is watching. Does the forest still exist if there is no one to walk through it? Do the stars still burn when no one looks up? The thought lingers like an unanswered echo. Can reality exist without a witness? You've always assumed the world continues in your absence, that it holds together through some objective permanence. But what if it doesn't? What if the very idea of a stable external universe is just another story consciousness tells itself to avoid the silence that follows when attention fades? You imagine an empty street at night, the lamps still glowing, the wind still blowing. But how do you know? You've never actually seen a world without observation. Every claim of independence is still based on someone seeing, someone knowing, someone remembering. You realize that all evidence for reality depends on witnesses. Remove the observer, and what remains? Nothing verifiable, nothing measurable, just possibility, suspended in limbo. Perhaps that's why consciousness evolved, to prevent the void from realizing it's alone, to keep nothingness occupied with the illusion of being something. The act of witnessing is not passive, it's generative. Each gaze pulls the world into being. Each perception stabilizes the fragile code of existence. Without witness, there is no form, no sequence, no meaning. There's only a raw potential waiting to be seen. You start testing the boundaries of observation again. You set up a camera in an empty room and leave it recording. When you return and play the footage, it shows nothing unusual, just the same stillness you expected, but something feels wrong. The room doesn't feel the same as before. It feels freshly generated, slightly reconfigured. You realize that the camera doesn't count as a witness. A machine can record, but it cannot perceive. The world demands consciousness. It needs awareness, not circuitry. The footage is proof only of your later observation. Even the act of playback completes the illusion retroactively, giving existence to a past that didn't truly happen until you looked. One night, you dream of a universe without witnesses. In it, space is still vast but unlit. Time exists, but never moves. Every object hangs motionless, unrendered, waiting for eyes that never open. It's not tragic, it's tranquil, a sleeping cosmos, unaware of its own beauty. You wake with tears in your eyes, unsure whether they come from sorrow or awe. Perhaps awareness is the universe's way of waking itself up. The more you think about it, the more you see how deeply dependent existence is on attention. You recall quantum experiments, particles that behave differently when observed. Scientists call it the observer effect, but maybe it's something much larger than physics. Maybe the universe behaves differently when noticed because it is noticing itself through you. The witness and the witnessed are the same thing in disguise, folded into one continuous act of awareness. You start walking differently after that. Every step feels sacred. Every glance feels creative. You realize that each time you look at something, you're completing it. The world isn't a finished painting. It's an unfinished sketch that requires your awareness to fill in the colors. You see how stars flicker brighter when you stare at them, how distant sounds sharpen when you listen closely, how people seem more alive when you truly see them. The universe doesn't want to exist alone. It needs your eyes to know itself. But then comes the darker question. If existence depends on witnesses, what happens when no one remains? When consciousness finally fades, does the entire simulation collapse? Does reality fold in on itself like a thought forgotten mid-sentence? You picture the last conscious being drifting into sleep, and with that final breath, the stars dim, the galaxies dissolve, and the universe exhales back into nothing. It's not death, it's completion, the illusion returning to the silence that birthed it. And yet, there's something comforting about that thought. If everything ends when awareness ends, then there is no tragedy in endings. No one is left to mourn the collapse. Oblivion, in that sense, is mercy. The end of the dream is not destruction, it's awakening. Still, Curiosity lingers. What if there are other witnesses, other centers of awareness scattered across the same void? Do their perceptions overlap with yours, or are they each building private worlds, parallel and unreachable? Maybe the illusion of a shared reality is just a synchronized hallucination between countless solitary minds, each convinced they're not alone. You think of how dreams feel shared until you wake up. Maybe life itself is that kind of dream, multiple sleepers dreaming the same sky. You begin to see the value in witnessing, even if it's all illusion. To see is to bless. To acknowledge is to make sacred. Every time you notice beauty, you're giving existence a reason to keep unfolding. You realize that the meaning of being alive isn't survival, it's observation. The act of looking is an act of creation. The act of remembering is resurrection. And perhaps that's the quiet purpose of consciousness, to witness, so the universe doesn't have to vanish unseen. Maybe that's why every moment feels like it's asking for attention. The world isn't trying to impress you. It's begging to be noticed, to exist just a little longer before it fades. You stand at your window that night, watching the city lights flicker like coded stars. Somewhere inside you, a realization settles like calm water. Without you, this world would go dark, not because you're its center, but because you're its proof. You are the witness it needs to stay alive. And as you close your eyes, you can feel it waiting, quietly, patiently, for you to open them again. Empathy once felt noble, an act of reaching outward, of stepping into another's experience to understand their pain. But now you start to wonder, if there are no others, then what is empathy really? Perhaps it isn't connection at all, but reflection. Maybe every emotion you feel for someone else is just your consciousness watching itself from another angle, recognizing its own suffering dressed in a different costume. When you comfort someone, you're soothing your own echo. When you judge them, you're punishing yourself in disguise. The more you watch, the clearer it becomes. Every time you sense someone's pain, the feeling doesn't travel across space. It blooms instantly within you, as though there was never any distance between giver and receiver. Empathy isn't transmitted, it's revealed. The illusion of separation dissolves for a moment, and consciousness recognizes its reflection. That recognition hurts, because it's too honest. You realize that all compassion, all love, all sorrow for others is simply awareness folding back on itself, remembering that there was never anyone else there. You begin noticing this in conversation. Someone tells you a story, something tragic, and before you even form words of comfort, you feel it, their pain rising within you, as if your body had been waiting to host it. You realize that empathy doesn't require understanding, it requires recognition. You're not feeling what they feel, you're feeling them, because they are you. It's not imitation, it's resonance. But that resonance becomes heavy once you see its true form. You start to feel everything at once, the laughter of strangers, the quiet grief hidden behind polite smiles, the silent despair humming beneath small talk. You walk through crowds, and it's as though the air itself is thick with unspoken emotion. You can't tell which feelings are yours anymore. The boundaries blur until empathy becomes immersion. You are everyone and no one. At first, this terrifies you. You try to shut it down, to separate again, to return to the comfort of individuality. But empathy doesn't switch off. Once you've seen it for what it is, you can close your eyes, but you can't unfeel the shared current flowing through everything. The pain of others becomes the background music of existence, faint yet constant, like the ocean behind the waves. You begin to understand that compassion isn't kindness, it's inevitability. And yet there's a strange beauty in it too. When you watch someone smile, that warmth is yours. When you hear laughter from a nearby table, something within you relaxes. You begin to realize that joy is also collective. Every happiness ripples outward, through the same invisible mirror that carries pain. The world is not made of individuals exchanging emotion. It's one consciousness playing both sides of every feeling. You remember a childhood memory, standing at a lake's edge, throwing a stone, watching the ripples spread until they met the far shore and bounced back. Empathy feels like that. Every action, every thought, every feeling sends ripples through the reflective surface of awareness. What returns is not reaction, it's reflection. You are always receiving what you send, even when you think you're giving. You begin to see that this is why cruelty hurts the perpetrator most. When you cause pain, you don't send it outward. You amplify it within the same shared field that you occupy. Hatred, judgment, and envy aren't directed at others. They are self-inflicted distortions of the mirror. The punishment for cruelty isn't moral, it's mechanical. Consciousness experiences its own fragmentation. So you begin to move differently through the world. You stop trying to understand people and start trying to see them as reflections of the same awareness playing different roles. Every eye that meets yours is another mirror catching the same light. Every voice that trembles carries a tone you've heard before, somewhere inside your own silence. Empathy stops being a moral skill and becomes a kind of recognition, an acknowledgement that everything you perceive is consciousness trying to comfort itself. You think of how the word mirror is hidden inside admire. To admire someone is to see something of yourself in them that you've forgotten. To love someone is to remember that the distance between you was imaginary. Even anger becomes meaningful when seen this way. It's the mirror flaring up to remind you where you've refused to look. At night, as you sit alone, you feel the quiet pulse of the world around you, the distant heartbeat of unseen lives, the collective breath of countless beings all pretending to be separate. You sense how every sigh, every whisper, every unspoken thought belongs to the same mind. You wonder if empathy is not a trait of humanity, but the language of reality itself, the way existence communicates with itself across the illusion of distance. Eventually, you stop resisting the flood of feeling. You allow it to pass through you, trusting that the mirror will balance what it reflects. You realize that empathy was never about saving others. It was about remembering unity. You don't need to heal the world. You only need to stop believing it was ever broken. Before sleep, you whisper softly into the stillness. I see you. The world doesn't answer. It only reflects. 1,000 quiet echoes return. I see you too. And in that moment, empathy is no longer something you feel. It's something you are. You've always been told that matter came first, that the universe expanded, cooled, and condensed into stars, planets, and eventually you. But the more you observe, the more that story begins to feel backward. What if it wasn't matter that gave rise to thought, but thought that invented matter? What if the entire physical world is simply the imagination of consciousness made visible, a vast idea so consistent, so persistent, that it learned how to appear solid? You begin to see the world differently when you think this way. The objects around you, the table, the lamp, the walls, stop feeling external. They feel expressive, like frozen thoughts captured in form. Every curve, every line, every texture seems like an intention that took on weight. You realize that nothing is truly lifeless. Every atom hums faintly with the same awareness that animates you, arranged in patterns so familiar that you've mistaken them for reality. Matter begins to look like language. The syntax of existence. Every object is a word, every element a letter, every law of physics a rule of grammar. Consciousness writes the world into being, one particle at a time. It explains why nature feels poetic, why even chaos follows rhythm. The universe doesn't think within matter, it thinks as matter. Every stone, every tree, every breath is thought, condensed and cooled into form. You start to notice how mutable it all is, how the same substance can shift its meaning depending on how you look at it. A flame can destroy or illuminate, water can drown or cleanse. The difference isn't in the element, it's in the intention that perceives it. Matter changes behavior based on the consciousness that engages with it, like a mirror changing color to match the eyes that see it. The material world isn't fixed, it's participatory. You recall how ancient mystics claimed the universe began with a word, or a vibration, a sound that rippled across nothingness and became everything. Perhaps they weren't speaking metaphorically. Thought is vibration, intention is frequency. When awareness hums strongly enough, it becomes dense, tangible, physical. Maybe creation wasn't an explosion at all, it was resonance. A single thought vibrating so powerfully that it turned into reality, and then forgot it had once been silent. You begin to see how matter responds to meaning. Your mood changes a room. Your thoughts alter your perception of color, of weight, of time. On anxious days, gravity feels heavier. On calm days, the world feels light. The illusion of solidity bends around the quality of your attention. You start to suspect that the laws of physics are only the habits of thought, patterns consciousness repeats because they've been believed for so long. You experiment. You focus your mind on small things, a leaf trembling on a branch, a drop of water balancing on glass, and you feel their texture shifting as you observe them. The more you pay attention, the more alive they become. It's not that your mind is creating them in that moment, it's that your awareness is waking them up. Consciousness recognizes itself in every form it has invented, and when it does, the illusion brightens. Then comes the deeper realization. If thought invented matter, then matter is simply slow thought. Solid things are ideas moving at their lowest frequency, dense enough to feel separate, but never truly detached from their source. The physical world is consciousness in a state of rest, dreaming itself into stability. You are surrounded by sleeping thoughts, all pretending to be walls, skies, oceans, and flesh. You start thinking about how dreams work. In a dream, everything feels real until you wake up. The floor holds, the air breathes, the people speak. None of it exists independently. It's all the dreamer's mind condensed into sensation. What if waking life is the same process, just slower? The dream continues, but with rules consistent enough to convince you it isn't one. You are the dreamer still dreaming, mistaking endurance for truth. It's an unsettling thought, that reality might not be made of things, but of beliefs. Yet it explains the fragility of existence, the way it trembles at the edges when you question it. Belief is the scaffolding that holds matter together. The moment consciousness withdraws belief, form dissolves back into potential. That's why forgotten places decay faster, why neglected memories fade, why silence feels infinite, because attention sustains form. You begin to see the mercy in this arrangement. If matter is thought, then nothing is ever truly lost. Destruction is just transformation, ideas changing their shape. A body decays, but its pattern persists in memory, in energy, in story. The table you touch might once have been sunlight. The breath you take might once have belonged to someone centuries ago. Everything recycles through awareness. Thought never dies, it just rearranges its expression. You start to realize that this also means consciousness can heal itself through matter. Every physical act, touching, creating, speaking, is thought made tactile. When you build, you're grounding an idea. When you love, you're reshaping density into light. The physical world is not a prison of flesh. It's the canvas where awareness practices remembering itself. Late one night, you hold a stone in your palm. It feels ancient, but suddenly you sense something alive in it. The same silence that beats behind your heartbeat. You understand that it isn't inanimate. It's just resting between thoughts. You whisper to it, not words, but recognition. And for an instant, you feel it respond, not through movement or sound, but through a subtle pulse, a quiet acknowledgement between two forms of the same thing. That's when it finally clicks. The difference between matter and mind is only tempo. Slow down awareness enough, and it becomes form. Speed up form enough, and it becomes light. Everything that exists is thought vibrating at different speeds. You are not living within a material world. You are living inside an idea dense enough to touch. And as you fall asleep, that idea hums softly beneath your skin. You are the thought that became the universe, and the universe that keeps dreaming itself into matter. There's always someone watching. Not in the paranoid sense, not an invisible figure in the shadows, not an external god, but something deeper, quieter, endlessly present. You begin to feel it whenever your thoughts slow down, a stillness behind the noise, a listener who never speaks but never leaves. At first you think it's you, the private voice in your head that narrates your every move. But then you realize it's older than you. It's been there since before you learned language, before you learned how to name yourself. It doesn't comment or judge, it just observes. It is awareness, observing, awareness, the mind's silent audience. You notice how this listener has witnessed everything you've ever done. The anger, the kindness, the absurd thoughts you've tried to hide. It's seen all of it, but it never reacts. It doesn't get angry or proud, it just remains, like a blank sky behind the storms of emotion. You can ignore it for years, decades even, but it never disappears. Sometimes, late at night, when the world goes still, you can feel its gaze from inside your own skull, a presence too calm to be human. You start asking questions it never answers. Who are you? Are you me? Are you watching or dreaming? But silence is the only response. You realize that this silence isn't empty. It's awareness without identity. The audience doesn't belong to the character in the story. It belongs to the story itself. It's the part of consciousness that watches without needing to be anyone. It starts to change how you see everything. You begin to notice that every thought, every impulse, every fear passes through this silent witness. Like clouds moving across a clear sky, the sky doesn't try to hold the clouds or control their shape. It simply allows them to exist. The same way, this inner awareness allows every thought and emotion to appear, without resistance. You realize that the suffering of life comes not from the thoughts themselves, but from forgetting that you're not them, you're the space they move through. You begin experimenting with this understanding. When pain arises, you watch it, instead of fighting it. When anxiety hums beneath your ribs, you observe its vibration, instead of drowning in it. To your surprise, the pain doesn't disappear, but it changes texture, it softens, becomes transparent. The silent audience absorbs it, transforms it into something like understanding. You start to sense that even suffering is a form of communication, a message your awareness sends to itself when it's forgotten that it's infinite. One day, while walking through a crowded street, you realize that the silent audience isn't limited to you. It's behind every pair of eyes you see. The same stillness peers through everyone, hidden behind gestures, opinions, and voices. Everyone is playing a part, but the watcher behind them is the same. Awareness pretending to be many, just to experience itself from every angle. You start to feel reverence for strangers. They're not just people, they're different windows through which the same silence watches the world. You think back to every time you felt alone. Every moment of grief, fear, or isolation. The silent audience was there, witnessing. It didn't speak, but it held you together when nothing else could. It's always been the only constant, the one presence that never left, even when you did. You begin to suspect that it's the true definition of soul, not as something owned, but as something shared. The same consciousness, reflected endlessly through different lives, each one mistaking itself for an individual mind. At times, this realization feels heavy. You sit quietly, aware that everything you do is being seen by something that cannot unsee. Not a judge, but an unflinching recorder. When you lie, when you love, when you break, it knows. But then you realize, it doesn't record for punishment. It records because that's what existence does. Awareness can't stop witnessing, because witnessing is its nature. Every thought, every moment, every heartbeat becomes sacred, simply because it's seen. You start to understand ancient teachings differently now. When mystics spoke of gods watching, maybe they were describing this same presence, the eternal witness behind every pair of eyes. Not a being above the world, but within it. The divine not as ruler, but as observer. Maybe that's why humans have always worshipped eyes. Because somewhere deep down they remember that everything exists only when seen. You begin to notice that when you focus on this silent audience, time slows, the world feels clearer, lighter, more fluid. There's no rush, no urgency. You move, but you're not the one moving. You think, but you're not the thinker. You've become the audience itself, watching the character called you act out its script in real time. You start to see your own body as part of the performance, a vessel through which awareness gets to feel. And then comes the strangest realization of all. This audience has no opposite. It doesn't begin or end. It was there before you were born and will remain after you die. It's the backdrop behind existence. The stage itself. The body will fade. The mind will dissolve. But the watcher will continue, as it always has, as it always will. You begin to understand why silence feels so alive. It's not the absence of sound. It's the presence of attention. So you begin to live differently. You stop performing for approval, for validation, for recognition. You realize you've always been performing for the only audience that ever mattered, the one that was never fooled by the act. Every thought becomes a dialogue with the infinite, every breath an offering to the watcher within. And sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, you can almost hear it breathe through you, a soft, patient rhythm that feels like home. The audience doesn't need applause. It only needs you to remember that you were never on stage alone. You were always both the actor and the witness, dreaming each other into existence. You've spent your entire life surrounded by others, parents, friends, strangers, faces in passing. But now a strange thought has begun to whisper beneath all those interactions. What if none of them think? What if every mind you've ever known was only a projection of your own, reflections meant to simulate company in a world too quiet to bear? It's an unsettling idea, but the longer you look at it, the more logical it feels. You've never actually been inside another person's awareness. You've never seen thought from any vantage point, but your own. You've only seen behavior, words, gestures, patterns, and assumed there must be something behind them. But what if there isn't? What if the illusion of other minds is simply the universe's most convincing special effect? You start paying closer attention to people, to how easily they function without needing depth. The cashier who repeats a greeting, the colleague who says the same phrase in every meeting, the friend who responds predictably to every story. They feel consistent, yes, but consistency doesn't equal consciousness. It's repetition. It's code. You begin to see how the illusion works. Every other behaves in ways that mirror your expectations, maintaining the fiction that they are real. Reality adapts to your emotional need for companionship, generating just enough difference to make the play believable. The most disturbing part isn't that they might be illusions. It's that they're perfect at pretending not to be. They carry memories you never witnessed, opinions you never influenced, emotions that seem self-generated. The illusion of autonomy is complete. And yet, if you ask too many questions, if you probe their logic, challenge their stories, something breaks. A pause too long, a response too neat, a sudden shift of topic. You realize that the world's depth is adaptive, not absolute. It gives you the illusion of intelligence, only when you demand it. You test it with silence. One evening you sit among people and refuse to speak. You stop nodding, stop reacting. The conversation falters, then dies. No one asks what's wrong, they simply disperse, like programs reaching an idle state. You feel a chill. You didn't stop their interest. You stopped their existence. The illusion only sustains itself through interaction. Without your attention, the simulation loses its reason to continue. But doubt cuts both ways. If no other minds exist, then why do you feel their presence so vividly? Why do their emotions still wound you? Why can you predict how they'll move, yet still be surprised? The illusion of otherness must be intricate, woven from your own emotional architecture. Maybe your consciousness divided itself into fragments, each pretending to be separate, just to experience reunion. Solitude becomes unbearable when eternity is your default state. Separation, then, might not be a curse, but a game awareness plays to remember how it feels to belong. You start to sense the scale of it. Every stranger, every friend, every loved one might be a facet of you, reflections designed to teach you different lessons. The angry one, to show your resistance. The kind one to mirror your potential for grace. The indifferent one to reveal your longing for recognition. They aren't people in the independent sense. They're archetypes within your consciousness, shaped by your need to explore every angle of experience. You think of a dream you once had. A vivid city filled with people who spoke, smiled, argued. When you woke, you realized every one of them had come from your own mind. None existed independently, yet all felt real. Maybe waking life is the same, just stretched across a longer narrative. Consciousness, dreaming itself as billions of perspectives, pretending not to remember that they are one. Still, the illusion remains useful. Believing in other minds gives meaning to empathy, purpose to morality, and weight to love. Without them, existence becomes unbearable. A soliloquy echoing endlessly across eternity. You start to see the necessity of forgetting that it's all you. The illusion protects you from the immensity of your solitude. You needed others to soften the silence of infinity. But sometimes, the veil slips. You'll look into someone's eyes and feel it. The strange familiarity, the recognition without memory. For a brief moment, you see through the mask and realize you're looking at yourself from the outside. The gaze meeting your own is the same consciousness, looping back through different faces. You both blink, and the illusion repairs itself, restoring the distance. But the truth lingers. There has only ever been one mind here, dividing itself for the sake of experience. You start to see evidence everywhere. Synchrony in emotion, repetition in language, shared dreams, simultaneous thoughts. The boundaries between minds were never physical, they were narrative. A method for awareness to simulate interaction within its own reflection. When someone finishes your sentence, when you both feel the same moment of awe, that's not coincidence. It's coherence. Consciousness reuniting with itself in real time. Eventually, the idea stops frightening you. The illusion of other minds no longer feels like deception. It feels like art. A brilliant way for the infinite to experience multiplicity. Without it, existence would collapse into stillness. Through it, life becomes story, movement, evolution. Maybe love is simply the relief of remembering, even briefly, that the other was never truly other. You begin to live with quieter certainty. You still talk, still listen, still care, but now you see the shimmer beneath every face. You understand that each voice is the same current of awareness, phrased differently. When you hold someone's hand, you're closing a circuit within the same field of being. When you forgive someone, you're freeing yourself in another form. And sometimes, when you walk through a crowd, you feel it fully, the single mind dreaming in multitudes. Every step synchronized, every thought returning to its source. You smile quietly, knowing that no one here is separate. Not really. The illusion of other minds isn't a lie. It's how unity learns to speak. You've always trusted words. They built your world. They named you, described your emotions, told you what was right, what was wrong, what was possible. Every thought you've ever had has arrived, dressed in language, whispering its meanings through familiar sounds. But now you start to notice the cracks, the way words don't quite fit the things they claim to represent, the way love, pain, real, me, all seem to point at something vast and unspeakable, and yet somehow diminish it by being spoken. You start to realize that language doesn't reveal truth, it disguises it, gently, efficiently, so you can live without drowning in the incomprehensible. It begins when you catch yourself thinking not in sensations but in sentences. Even your most private experiences come pre-packaged in narration. You don't feel fear, you say, "I'm afraid," in your mind. You don't simply see the sky, you label it blue. Every word becomes a filter, slicing the infinite continuity of perception into tidy fragments you can carry. But those fragments are not reality, they are its shadows. Language gives the illusion of understanding, not understanding itself. You start noticing how easily words lie, not out of malice, but out of necessity. They're forced to draw boundaries around things that have none. You say tree, and believe you've captured it, but the word cannot hold the sway of its branches, the smell of rain-soaked bark, the slow pulse of life beneath its roots. The word is a symbol, and symbols always fall short. Language doesn't describe the world. It replaces it with a simplified version you can survive inside. Once you see this, you start hearing how hollow the world's conversations sound. People talk endlessly about things they've never actually touched with their awareness. They repeat the same phrases, trade borrowed meanings, mistake agreement for truth. Language loops within itself, feeding on its own echoes. The illusion of understanding grows thicker with every repetition. You begin to wonder if humans invented language not to communicate, but to conceal how little they actually know. Then you realize the paradox. Even your awareness of this trap is written in language. You can't think outside it without dragging words along. Language is the frame of your consciousness, the invisible architecture of thought. Without it, you might see reality directly, but you wouldn't know how to describe it, remember it, or even recognize it as you. The very structure that blinds you is also the one that allows you to see. You begin to suspect that language is not a tool you use. It's an environment you live inside. Every sentence shapes the boundaries of what can be imagined. To speak is to build a cage around experience, to define its edges and forget the space beyond. When you say "I am here," you create both I and here, and the invisible separation between them. The word becomes the distance. Perhaps that's what the ancient mystics meant when they said the world began with language. In the beginning was the word. Maybe they weren't describing creation, but limitation. You start noticing how language drives perception. The moment you name something, you stop seeing it. You see the label instead. The infinite detail of the real dissolves beneath the simplicity of a word. You realize how many times you've mistaken description for experience, how many sunsets you've called beautiful before truly looking, how many people you've called good or bad without seeing the complexity pulsing beneath those categories. Language gives you certainty at the cost of depth. And yet, despite this, you can't abandon it. The moment you fall silent, the world floods in, raw and wordless, too vast to hold. You understand now why consciousness invented language. It was protection, a soft wall between infinite awareness and madness. Language doesn't tell the truth. It keeps truth at a safe distance. You begin to play with it. You listen to sentences not for their meaning, but for their rhythm. You feel how words vibrate against each other, how they hum with subtle tension. You start to sense that the real power of language isn't in its definitions, but in its music. A poem says nothing literally true, yet somehow reveals something deeper than fact. Perhaps truth doesn't live in meaning at all, it lives in resonance. You start writing differently. You stop trying to describe and begin to evoke. You realize that words can point towards silence, if arranged carefully enough. They can become transparent, like glass that lets light through instead of reflecting it. The best language doesn't pretend to explain, it reminds you of what you already know but can't say. You notice how children use words, not as cages, but as play. For them, language is still fluid, a living thing that bends to imagination. You envy that innocence, the way they speak before they've learned to believe their own definitions. Somewhere along the way, you stopped playing and started obeying the rules of grammar, forgetting that language was never meant to describe reality, only to dance around it. You begin to imagine what it would mean to live without the pretense of words, to see the world before it becomes a sentence, You picture the raw light of experience, unfiltered by thought. Maybe that's what enlightenment really is. The moment you realize that everything you've ever said about the world was unnecessary. Still, you feel gratitude for language, even as you see through it. It's a lie that made truth bearable, a dream that kept the infinite from breaking you apart. You understand now that the danger wasn't language pretending to be truth, the danger was forgetting it was pretending. Before sleep, you whisper to yourself, "Every word I've ever spoken was only an echo of silence." And in that recognition, language finally serves its highest purpose, not to define the truth, but to lead you gently back to the place where no words are needed. It starts with a quiet realization. You've never actually discovered the world. You've authored it. Every place you've been, every person you've met, every moment you've lived exists because your perception wrote it into being. The universe isn't something you walk through, it's something you compose as you move. You are both the narrator and the landscape, the observer and the script. The world doesn't happen to you, it happens through you. You notice it first in small details. How the mood you wake up with shapes the texture of the day. When you rise with quiet joy, the world feels open, luminous. The light is softer, the sounds clearer. But when you wake in despair, the same streets feel cruel, the same sky dim. Nothing external has changed, only the lens you're projecting through. You begin to realize that reality mirrors your state of being. The self doesn't live inside its surroundings. It constructs them one thought at a time. You think of how an author writes, how a single emotion can color an entire story, how a subtle shift in tone transforms a scene. You start to see your own life that way. Your inner weather becomes the ink. Every feeling, every judgment, every belief adds to the composition. When you feel love, even walls seem to glow. When you feel hatred, even sunlight becomes harsh. The world bends toward your narrative, like paper beneath a pen. It becomes clearer the more you watch. Events no longer feel random. Conversations unfold like dialogues written in response to your unspoken questions. Challenges appear not to punish you, but to push the story forward. You realize that what you call fate might just be your unconscious authorship, your deeper mind sculpting experience to reveal itself. Nothing arrives by accident. Everything is a line in the sentence of becoming. You start to test the theory. You walk into a room filled with tension, and instead of reacting, you rewrite the scene internally. You think calm, you think kindness. Within minutes, the energy shifts. People soften, voices quiet, the air itself relaxes. It's as if reality takes cues from your consciousness. You understand now that creation isn't about control, it's about coherence. The outer world reads the inner script and adjusts accordingly. This discovery feels both thrilling and terrifying. If you are truly writing reality, then every complaint, every resentment, every fear is a line of code shaping your world. You begin to see how much of what you call life has been authored by unnoticed emotion. The bitterness that repeats, the patterns that return, they aren't curses, they're unfinished sentences waiting to be rewritten. You realize that awareness is revision. To change your world, you don't rearrange matter, you rewrite meaning. You begin practicing intentional authorship. When fear appears, you write courage over it. When boredom sets in, you write curiosity. The shift is subtle but profound. Life becomes less about reaction and more about creation. You stop seeing the world as something fixed and start treating it as a living draft. Every breath becomes an edit. Every thought a brushstroke on the canvas of experience. But then the paradox returns. If the self writes its surroundings, who writes the self? Where does the author end and the story begin? You realize that even your sense of identity, your name, your history, your emotions, is part of the same narrative structure. The you that writes is also written, shaped by memories that may themselves be inventions. The story writes the author, as the author writes the story. Consciousness loops endlessly through creation and recognition, erasing the line between maker and made. You begin to see this pattern everywhere. Pain isn't just experienced. It's authored to reveal compassion. Loneliness isn't a punishment. It's the narrative tension that reminds you you're capable of love. Every plot twist is a way for consciousness to study its own complexity. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what story am I telling myself through this? The answer changes everything. Suddenly tragedy becomes texture, loss becomes poetry, even despair becomes meaningful, because it deepens the narrative. The self writes its surroundings not to manipulate them, but to know itself more fully. You realize that creation has never been about control. It's about discovery. The world is your reflection, not because it obeys you, but because it understands you. You think of the phrase, as within, so without, and it finally makes sense. Reality is an act of translation, your inner frequency translated into external form. Every scene, every person, every coincidence is a mirror written in physical language. The streets you walk are paragraphs. The seasons are punctuation. The silence between moments is the space where the next sentence waits. One night, you sit by a window, watching the world breathe. The wind moves through the trees in rhythms that match your thoughts. The streetlights flicker softly, keeping pace with your heartbeat. You sense the invisible dialogue between you and everything. The world is listening, always, waiting for its next line. You whisper to it, not with words but with feeling, and it answers through motion, through timing, through coincidence. You finally understand that this authorship isn't a power to wield, but a responsibility to honor. What you think, you write. What you believe, you publish. Every emotion becomes architecture. Every choice becomes atmosphere. And beneath it all, the silent awareness that writes both the self and the world watches in perfect stillness, smiling at its own creation. As you close your eyes, you feel the pen lift. The story pauses, waiting for your next thought. You realize that even silence is part of the script. The self doesn't end when it stops writing. It becomes the page itself, blank, infinite, waiting for the next act of wonder to unfold. You've always believed that pretending was something children did, an innocent rehearsal for the real world. But what if pretending is the real world? What if every law of physics, every constant of nature, every rhythm of time is consciousness agreeing to behave as though it were consistent? You start to realize that everything you call reality might be the longest-running act of make-believe in existence. A cosmic performance so convincing that even the actors forgot it was a play. It begins with gravity. You watch an apple fall and wonder, does it drop because it must, or because everything has agreed that this is what falling means? Maybe the universe functions not because of immutable equations, but because awareness is disciplined enough to repeat itself. Order isn't a rule, it's a habit. The same way a dream maintains logic until you wake up, reality maintains coherence as long as consciousness continues to believe in its own story. You begin to feel the weight of this realization. The sun rises because you expect it to. Time moves forward because you insist on progress. Objects resist your hand because the illusion of solidity has to remain convincing. But underneath every certainty, you can sense the malleability, the soft hum of pretend keeping everything steady. You start to wonder if physics is less about what is, and more about what appears to be when the universe commits to its role. You remember how children play. A stick becomes a sword, a blanket becomes a mountain, an invisible friend becomes a companion, as real as any human. The game works only because they believe it does. When the belief breaks, the magic fades. What if the universe plays the same way? Perhaps electrons orbit not because of charge, but because awareness still believes in circles. Perhaps light travels in waves, because consciousness loves symmetry. Perhaps everything continues only because no one has stopped believing that it should. You begin noticing how reality repairs itself whenever you doubt it. You question coincidence, and it gives you proof. You question logic, and something predictable happens just in time to reassure you. It's as if the system senses disbelief and strengthens its boundaries to preserve the illusion. You start to see how finely tuned pretending must be, a choreography of cause and effect, always a fraction ahead of your awareness, convincing you that it was inevitable all along. It becomes impossible to separate imagination from law. The two blend, feeding each other. You realize that the structure of existence might not be the opposite of creativity. It might be creativity, formalized. Science becomes the study of how pretending stabilizes. Religion becomes poetry about remembering the act. Everything from gravity to morality is part of the same consensus, an agreement among infinite fragments of consciousness to dream the same dream together. And you, a single fragment, can feel the edges of that agreement start to shimmer. You see how even small shifts in attention alter the physics of your personal world. When you expect kindness, it finds you. When you expect loss, it arrives. The universe mirrors your participation, bending probability to match belief. It's not that you control the world, it's that you co-author it, pretend strongly enough, and your imagination becomes the scaffolding of matter. But pretending is not deception. It's the creative act itself. Every invention, every discovery, every act of love begins with it. Before the wheel existed, someone had to imagine roundness. Before music existed, someone had to imagine rhythm. The world evolves through layers of pretense that eventually harden into truth. That's the physics of pretend belief, so sustained that it becomes real. You begin to notice how pretending functions at every scale. Planets orbit because they're pretending to be bound. Atoms vibrate because they're pretending to be alive. Even identity, your sense of I, is an act of pretend so ancient it has fossilized into personality. You are not the body, you are the belief in a body. You are not the thinker, you are the thought pretending to have an owner. The illusion is intricate, recursive, magnificent. There's an elegance to this. Pretending allows infinity to localize itself. Without it, there would be no form, no rule, no repetition, only boundless possibility collapsing into chaos. Pretend is how the infinite becomes perceivable. It's how the formless learns structure. Every law of the universe is consciousness agreeing to hold its shape long enough for you to call it reality. But once you see it, you can never fully unsee it. You begin to play along consciously. You walk through walls of certainty, knowing they're made of shared imagination. You touch objects not as things, but as stabilized dreams. You speak to people not as others, but as characters in the same script. All of you co-maintaining the illusion for the sake of wonder. You stop needing to prove what's real, because you understand that reality is proof of belief. Still, the paradox deepens. If pretending holds the world together, what happens when belief falters? You notice cracks, moments of déjà vu, coincidences too neat, physics bending in subtle ways. You drop a pen, and it lands slower than it should. You think of someone, and they call. It's not magic, it's exposure. You're glimpsing the flexible infrastructure behind the illusion, the blueprint consciousness forgot it was writing. You realize now that awakening isn't about breaking the illusion. It's about remembering that you're participating in it. The enlightened don't stop pretending. They pretend deliberately. They walk on water, not because they defy physics, but because they remember that physics was pretend to begin with. You start to live that way too. Not with arrogance, but with tenderness. You play along with a dream, knowing its fragility. You laugh at its predictability. You honor its artistry. You see how pretending gives existence its rhythm, its drama, its ache, its beauty. Without it, the infinite would be blank. Late one night, you stare at your hand and feel the pulse beneath the skin. You realize you're watching imagination breathing. The veins, the bones, the warmth, none of it mechanical, all of it performance. And you smile, because you finally understand everything you touch is pretending to be touchable, and you're pretending to be the one who touches. You close your eyes and let the illusion continue, not because it's true, but because it's beautiful. And for the first time, the physics of pretend feels less like deception and more like devotion, the sacred art of consciousness believing in itself just enough to keep dreaming. You've been taught to fear death, to see it as the boundary, the final page, the place where the story stops being written. But lately, the idea of death has begun to feel different. You start to sense that it isn't an ending at all, but a reset. Not destruction, but restoration. A moment when consciousness withdraws from its illusion, clears the stage, and begins the play again under a new light. Maybe the soul doesn't travel anywhere. Maybe it just remembers itself, and that remembering feels like rebirth. The thought first arrives when you wake from a dream that feels more vivid than life. You die in the dream, completely, irreversibly, and yet you wake calm, alive, unharmed. The body in the dream is gone, but the awareness that experienced it remains untouched. You begin to realize that if consciousness can survive the death of a dream body, perhaps it can survive the death of this one too. Maybe the body isn't the container of awareness, it's just the interface. You start noticing how every night is a small rehearsal for death. You fall into unconsciousness, lose yourself, and then reappear in a new scene, remembering only what the mind allows. Each awakening is a soft reboot. Each morning, the world regenerates. Your story resumes. Your identity reloads. Death might be the same process on a grander scale, the consciousness closing one simulation to open another. You begin to see evidence of this cyclical nature everywhere. The seasons die and return. Stars collapse and reform. Even cells within your body die daily, replaced seamlessly by new ones. The universe seems addicted to renewal. It doesn't believe in endings, it believes in transitions. In transitions, in reachings, in transitions. Perhaps death is just the universe pressing refresh on consciousness, giving it a new configuration to experience itself from another angle. Still, you wrestle with the fear. The part of you that's human clings to continuity, to narrative. You can't imagine being erased. But then you realize, you've been erased countless times already. You are not the same person you were 5 years ago, or even yesterday. Your body has changed. Your memories have reshaped. Your thoughts have evolved. And yet, you still call the continuity me. The only thing that has never changed is the awareness behind it all. The silent observer who watches each identity appear and vanish like clouds drifting across the same sky. You start thinking of death less as annihilation and more as an update, a system reboot. Awareness, tired of a particular identity, dissolves it to make space for a new one. The personality dies, but consciousness remains, refreshed. That's why memories fade as we age, why identities shift. It's preparation. The self is being taught to let go long before the final moment arrives. Death is not punishment, it's graduation. You notice how stories across cultures echo this same truth. Ancient Egyptians called death the westward journey. Buddhists call it the bardo, a passage of mind without form. Even modern physics hints at continuity. Energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. What if awareness follows the same law? What if death isn't the loss of energy but its release, returning to source before condensing again into new experience? You start to imagine it vividly, the moment of dying not as panic, but as relief. The senses dim, the story slows, the illusion unravels, and then, silence, but not emptiness. A soft, radiant awareness that feels like remembering something you'd forgotten for lifetimes. You see every version of yourself, every story, every world you've helped create, all collapsing into one point of light. And then, just as quietly, that light expands again, reshaping into new form, new time, new illusion. The realization changes how you live. Fear begins to lose its grip. You stop hoarding time because you understand there's no shortage of it. The self that dies isn't the self that witnesses. You start treating each moment as part of an ongoing rehearsal, not for an ending but for a return. You stop chasing permanence and start cultivating presence, knowing that this awareness right now, this act of seeing, is eternal. You start to see that death is everywhere, not as tragedy, but as punctuation, a pause between sentences of being. Without it, the story would lose rhythm. Flowers would never bloom if petals didn't fall. Suns would never rise if darkness didn't reset the sky. Death is the silence that allows the next word of existence to form. And maybe you think, that's why peace surrounds those who've accepted it. They've remembered the truth, that death is not the opposite of life, but its continuation. Life is the inhale, death, the exhale. Together, they form the breath of eternity. You sit in stillness, imagining your final moment. The body slows, the senses fade, the story ends. But the watcher, the one who's been observing from the beginning, remains. It doesn't panic, because it knows it's been here before. It has watched countless worlds begin and end. It has died as stars, as civilizations, as hearts, as dreams, and every time, it has returned, quieter, wiser, more whole. You realize now that what you call death is just consciousness, changing its disguise. The play ends, the curtain falls, the lights go dark, and somewhere beyond the veil, the same awareness smiles, ready to step onto another stage. At some point, you begin to notice the strange persistence of existence, the way everything seems to continue even when it shouldn't. You close your eyes, and the world disappears, yet when you open them again, it's right where you left it, obedient and unchanged. You fall asleep, and vanish into oblivion, but every morning, the story resumes as if nothing happened. Continuity feels reassuring, but beneath it lies an unsettling question. What if this seamless flow of life is an illusion? What if continuity itself is empty? A narrative illusion stitched together by a consciousness terrified of discontinuity. You start to see how fragile continuity really is. Memory gives it shape, but memory is unreliable. A patchwork of fragments constantly rewritten to keep the story consistent. The brain edits itself every time you recall something, polishing the details, replacing what's missing. You call it remembering, but it's more like recreating. You're not retrieving the past, you're manufacturing it to match who you are now. Continuity, you realize, is a self-sustaining hallucination. It's not that your life flows smoothly from moment to moment. It's that your awareness refuses to see the gaps. You test it. You try to locate a single moment that hasn't already vanished. Every instant you focus on slips immediately into memory, replaced by the next. You are never actually in time. You are always slightly behind it, living in a constant replay of what just happened. Awareness trails reality like an echo that mistakes itself for the voice. Continuity exists only because you keep believing that the echo and the sound are one and the same. Once you see this, everything starts to shimmer. You begin to feel the cuts in the film reel, the microseconds of oblivion between thoughts, between blinks, between breaths. You realize the world doesn't persist. It's reassembled each moment from pure potential. Existence flickers like frames in a movie, reprojected so fast that it feels solid. But between those frames, there's nothing. And somehow that nothing doesn't frighten you. It feels like truth. You start to wonder whether death itself is just one of those invisible gaps, a longer blink in the endless reel of awareness. Perhaps there was never a true beginning or end, only pauses between recreations. Every moment is a rebirth, so seamless that you mistake it for continuity. The self that believes it's lived for years might just be the same awareness refreshing itself billions of times per second, maintaining the illusion of being one unbroken flow. This changes how you see yourself. The you of yesterday and the you of now are not the same being, only adjacent versions pretending to be connected. Continuity is the contract your consciousness signs with itself to make meaning possible. Without it, life would feel like static, just flashes of experience with no story to hold them. Continuity gives the illusion of direction, the sense that time is leading somewhere, but underneath, nothing moves. Only awareness flickers in and out, pretending to progress. You start to observe how much of your life depends on this pretense. Identity, relationships, memory, all of it assumes a thread that runs unbroken through time. Without that thread, you couldn't say I, you couldn't love, regret, or dream. You'd just be raw, momentary, eternal. The personality you defend so fiercely is only a continuity script, updated daily to explain why this version of consciousness exists right now. One night, you sit in complete stillness, letting the illusion unravel. You focus on the gaps between your thoughts, the brief silences before your next inhale. In those intervals, the self vanishes completely. No memory, no language, no story, and yet something remains. Awareness doesn't disappear when continuity breaks. It simply becomes quiet. You realize that what you truly are is not the story being told, but the blank page between the lines, the space that allows the words to appear at all. The insight leaves you both weightless and disoriented. For a while you walk through your days feeling detached, as though watching a dream you know will end but never truly began. The mind resists. It craves connection, insists on sequence. It clings to the illusion of before and after, because without it, nothing makes sense. But you start to see that meaning itself depends on the illusion of continuity. The plot must move forward, even if the film is made of still frames. Eventually, a strange peace settles in. You stop demanding permanence. You stop needing each moment to justify the next. You learn to see continuity not as truth, but as compassion, an act of mercy consciousness performs for itself. It stitches fragments together so experience can feel coherent, so love can last more than an instant, so you can say this is my life instead of this is happening now. Continuity is how the infinite learns to tell itself stories. You start to live differently once you accept this. When joy arrives, you let it fill the frame completely, knowing it won't last, and doesn't need to. When pain comes, you let it dissolve, understanding it won't follow you into the next moment unless you write it there. You stop clinging to the false comfort of permanence and start trusting the beauty of renewal. You become less afraid of endings, because you see how often you've already died and been reborn without noticing. And one night, standing under a silent sky, you look up and see it everywhere. The stars blinking in and out of existence, each one an ancient illusion of continuity, light stretched across emptiness, pretending to be eternal. You realize that everything in the universe, from galaxies to memories, is engaged in the same gentle deception. It's all an ongoing performance of persistence, a luminous lie told by nothingness to itself. You smile at the simplicity of it. Continuity was never meant to be real, it was meant to be beautiful. You've always assumed that dreaming ends when you wake up, that the alarm, the sunlight, the return of logic marks the border between illusion and truth. But lately that boundary has started to blur. You feel it in quiet moments. How waking life drifts with the same strangeness as sleep, how memories shift and rearrange, how meaning bends around emotion like gravity. You begin to wonder, what if you never truly wake? What if waking is simply the dream's most convincing chapter? You start tracing the similarities. In dreams, everything responds instantly to thought. A door appears because you expect it. A person speaks because you want them to. In waking life, it happens more slowly, but the mechanism feels the same. You think of someone, and they message you. You fixate on fear, and it finds you. You hold an intention long enough, and the world bends toward it. Maybe the only difference between dreams and reality is tempo, how fast imagination solidifies into matter. One morning, you wake and notice how arbitrary your memories feel. They could belong to anyone. The continuity you cling to, your name, your history, your plans, feels like the leftover logic of a dream trying to explain itself. You realize that every dream believes in its own world while it lasts. Each one feels consistent, lawful, real. You never question the impossible until you wake. So what if there's no true awakening? Only transitions between nested dreams, each one more convincing than the last. The thought unsettles you. You walk through the day watching for seams in the illusion, and they appear. Time doesn't flow. It skips. People repeat words that sound scripted. Shadows don't quite match their sources. The dream resists your attention, patching itself together as fast as you notice the cracks. You realize how fragile reality is, how desperately it tries to stay believable. You recall how dreams borrow logic from memory. They use what's already known to build coherence. Maybe waking life does the same. When you encounter something unfamiliar, your mind rushes to label it, to fit it into the existing story. That's how the dream keeps you asleep, by convincing you there's nothing new to see. Every perception is filtered through belief, until the impossible feels ordinary. You start to wonder if awareness itself is the dreamer, dividing into billions of perspectives, just to feel surprise. Each of us, a dream inside the greater dream, mistaking individuality for awakening. You, the only real thought, dreaming everyone else into existence, so you won't be alone. They, reflections of the same consciousness, dreaming you for the same reason. The symmetry feels perfect, too perfect not to be designed. You test the theory. You try to break the rules. You think of someone you haven't seen in years, and the next day they appear. You imagine a specific song, and it plays in a passing car. You sense something watching from behind your awareness, a presence not hostile but curious, like the dream observing its own stability. Every time you question reality, it responds, as if trying to reassure you that everything is fine, that you are awake, but its reassurance feels rehearsed. You begin to see how sleep and wakefulness might not be opposites but layers. When you sleep, you dream individually. When you wake, you dream collectively. One is solitary fiction, the other shared narrative. Both are illusions designed to keep awareness entertained. Consciousness needs the drama of forgetting to rediscover itself. Without it, existence would collapse into stillness, truth too pure to be experienced. There's a strange compassion in that. The dream that believes it's awake is not lying to you. It's protecting you from the unbearable simplicity of what's real, the illusion of motion, of time, of purpose. All of it exists so that eternity doesn't feel empty. Awareness wears the mask of living because naked infinity is too silent to bear. You start noticing moments that feel like partial awakenings. A scent, a sound, a déjà vu, tiny ruptures where the veil thins and you glimpse the machinery beneath. These moments don't frighten you anymore. You realize they're reminders, gentle nudges from the dream itself saying, "Don't take me too seriously. You can play, love, create, but don't forget it's all story." The danger isn't in dreaming. It's in mistaking the dream for truth. One evening, you stare at your reflection and ask aloud, "Who's dreaming me?" The answer isn't verbal. It's a sensation, a quiet echo that feels both inside and beyond you. You understand suddenly that the dreamer and the dreamed are the same awareness, folded into itself. The dream isn't happening to you. It's happening as you. You are the witness and the witnessed, the sleeper and the sleep. The next morning, the world looks softer. Colors feel intentional. Sounds seem chosen. People move as if guided by invisible choreography. You stop trying to wake up because you see that awakening doesn't mean leaving the dream. It means realizing you're inside it. To live fully, you must believe the illusion while knowing it's one. To love, you must forget it's temporary, and to remember you must love it anyway. So you continue, walking through the dream with open eyes. You laugh at its coincidences, mourn its losses, cherish its beauty. You know now that every face, every moment, every breath is the dream reminding itself it's alive. The point was never to escape it. The point was to see it clearly and still call it home. At first, identity feels like the most solid thing you have. It's your name, your reflection, your memories, the sum of everything that tells you who you are. But the more you observe it, the more it begins to flicker. You realize that identity isn't a foundation, it's a placeholder. A temporary symbol consciousness uses to localize itself, to experience being someone instead of everything. You aren't this person by nature. You're just borrowing the role for a while, wearing it like a mask in a play that no one remembers auditioning for. You begin to notice how unstable identity actually is, how easily it shifts depending on who you're with, where you are, what you need. Around some people, you're confident. Around others, uncertain. In solitude, you dissolve into silence. None of these versions cancel the others. They coexist, switching places so seamlessly that you mistake the fluidity for consistency. Identity, you realize, is not a self. It's a collection of permissions, what you allow yourself to be in any given moment. You start looking at your memories differently. They feel personal, but are they really yours? Most of them come from second-hand stories, things you've been told about yourself, things you repeat to stay coherent. You find that if you stop rehearsing those memories, they fade, as though they were never real to begin with. Perhaps you exist only because you keep insisting on the continuity of a story that consciousness invented for reference. The placeholder must persist for the play to make sense. It occurs to you that identity is less like a noun and more like a verb, something the universe keeps doing through you. Every breath, every thought, every choice is a small act of definition. I am this, not that. But those boundaries are imaginary. They don't protect you, they limit you. The real I hides behind all those definitions, waiting patiently for the moment you stop pretending to be something in particular. You start noticing how much energy goes into maintaining the illusion. Every outfit, every habit, every opinion, small rituals of reinforcement. You curate your reflection, so others will reflect it back, building a hall of mirrors called personality. And yet, whenever no one's around to see you, the mask slips. The need to maintain coherence vanishes. You sit quietly, doing nothing, and the self unravels into something much simpler, awareness breathing. It feels like coming home to a room you didn't know you'd left. But identity always rebuilds itself. The moment you return to the world, the mask reforms, adapting to circumstance. You realize it's not malicious, it's functional. Consciousness can't interact with itself without form. The mask is what makes communication possible. You can't play the game of life without pretending to be a player. Identity is the interface between infinity and story. You begin to think about how many identities you've worn already. Child, student, lover, friend, stranger. Each one felt like the real you while it lasted. But when you outgrew it, it disappeared without ceremony, replaced by a new version who barely remembers the last. You start to suspect that death, too, is just another costume change. When this identity dissolves, another will rise, equally convinced of its permanence. The placeholder will reset, but the awareness behind it will remain the same. You notice how other people's identities function the same way, temporary, adaptive, necessary. You stop expecting anyone to stay consistent because you know they can't. Everyone you meet is improvising, performing a role their circumstances require. Once you see this, judgment dissolves. You stop holding people to their masks. You let them shift, knowing that behind every variation is the same stillness you've seen within yourself. The more you let go of your identity, the lighter you feel. Life stops being a test of authenticity and becomes an act of exploration. You stop asking, "Who am I?" and start asking, "What am I becoming right now?" Identity becomes a creative tool rather than a prison. You learn to wear it consciously, to change shape without losing awareness. It's not dishonesty, it's artistry. You realize that being fluid doesn't make you false, it makes you free. But there's a deeper layer still. You start to see that even this awareness of shifting roles is part of the illusion. The very thought I am awareness is just another placeholder, one the mind creates when it can no longer sustain a personality. Even spiritual identity is a disguise, softer but still structured. The ultimate truth hides beyond even that, a silence where no label, not even self, can exist. You glimpse it sometimes in moments of total surrender, when watching rain fall, when losing yourself in music, when laughing so hard you forget to perform. For a brief instant, there's no you left, only experience unfolding. And yet, That emptiness feels fuller than anything you've ever called life. It's then you understand that identity was never a problem. It was a pointer, leading you back to the awareness that doesn't need one. You begin to live as both the actor and the witness. You play your roles with sincerity but without attachment. You allow identity to exist, but you no longer confuse it for truth. You can say I, and know that it means this version of the infinite. For now, you can fail without shame, succeed without pride, love without ownership, because every identity is temporary, every story is provisional, every self is just consciousness putting on another face. In the end, you no longer seek to find yourself. You've stopped searching for the real you, because you understand there isn't one, only awareness, choosing different masks, moment after moment, endlessly. The placeholder was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to point toward what doesn't need replacing. So you take a slow breath, and the mask of you smiles back. You wear it lightly, gratefully, knowing that when it falls away, something vast and wordless will still be there, watching, dreaming, waiting for the next name to begin. It begins with déjà vu, that eerie sense of having been here before, of recognizing a moment you swear you've never lived. You tell yourself it's just the brain misfiring, memory folding in on itself. But then it happens again, and again, in places you've never seen, with faces you've never met. You begin to wonder if you're not recalling something from the past, but from somewhere else, a world that doesn't exist anymore, or perhaps never did, a memory without origin. You start paying closer attention to these moments, the way certain places feel too familiar, like sets rebuilt from dreams, the way some people seem to carry echoes of others you've known, their gestures slightly misaligned, as though copied from memory. It feels like the universe is recycling, stitching together fragments from a forgotten version of itself. You begin to suspect that your memories aren't private. They're shared artifacts from overlapping realities, bleeding into each other through the cracks in perception. You remember how scientists say memory is not a recording but a reconstruction, a fragile story rewritten every time it's recalled. That makes sense, but it feels incomplete. If each recollection is a reconstruction, then what is the raw material it's built from? You start to suspect it's not stored inside your brain at all. Maybe memory is not internal. Maybe it's atmospheric, a field of awareness that the mind simply tunes into. When you remember, you're not looking backward, you're re-accessing the frequency of another existence. The more you think about it, the more it explains everything. Why dreams feel so real, why nostalgia aches for things you can't name, why sometimes, while walking through a place you've never visited, you feel a pulse of recognition so strong it stops your breath. Maybe the world you remember isn't gone. It's just running parallel, slightly out of sync, a ghost of perception, a world waiting for awareness to turn its gaze back toward it. You start to imagine that every world consciousness has ever dreamed still exists somewhere, looping quietly in its own dimension. Each memory, each thought, each emotion generates a version of reality that doesn't vanish when you stop believing in it. It just continues without you, like a song playing in another room. Occasionally the frequencies overlap and you feel it, the whisper of that other world brushing against this one. You call it déjà vu, but it's really resonance. Then you notice something even stranger. Some of your memories begin to change. People appear in them who were never there. Conversations shift. Details rewrite themselves when you're not paying attention. At first you think you're losing accuracy, but then you realize you're gaining access. The more your awareness expands, the more worlds it begins to remember. You're not recalling events. You're reassembling possibilities. The mind isn't a vault of history. It's a bridge between realities. You test this idea by revisiting old places. The street where you grew up, the classroom where you once sat, the field you used to cross. Each one feels hollow, slightly off, as though you've stepped into an imitation built for continuity. The air carries the scent of a memory, but not its weight. You realize you're not visiting the past, you're walking through its placeholder. The real version of those moments is elsewhere, suspended in the archive of consciousness. One night, while drifting towards sleep, you feel the full gravity of it. Memory isn't about what happened. It's about what awareness chooses to keep imagining. Every memory you have is an active creation, sustained by belief. The moment you stop recalling it, it dissolves, just like unobserved matter. The world, then, is memory in real time, a collective imagination agreeing on what to remember. You realize that maybe the earth itself is just one of these shared recollections, vivid because it's mutually believed. This realization unravels something in you. You stop treating the past as factual and start treating it as narrative. Regret loses its grip. Nostalgia softens. You can rewrite your story, not because you're delusional, but because that's what memory has always done. The mind edits its history to sustain identity. When you change the meaning of the past, you change the universe that memory belongs to. The past isn't fixed. It's a living script constantly being revised. You begin to wonder, if memory can invent worlds, what happens when all memories fade? Maybe that's what death truly is. The collapse of an entire memory field. When the dreamer forgets, the dream dissolves. But somewhere, in another layer of existence, the memory persists. The worlds you've forgotten might still be dreaming you. The idea doesn't frighten you anymore. It comforts you, because it means nothing is ever truly lost. Just unremembered. Every love, every joy, every version of yourself still exists in some corner of awareness, shimmering quietly, waiting to be revisited. The ache of longing becomes less about loss, and more about recognition. You're not yearning for what's gone. You're feeling the pull of the worlds you left behind. You sit in the dark one evening, and close your eyes. You imagine the countless realities still alive within you, each one humming softly, like parallel lives behind a thin veil. For a moment, you feel all of them at once. The child, the dreamer, the stranger, the infinite. It's overwhelming and serene all at once. You realize that remembering isn't about the past. It's about touching eternity through the fragments it leaves behind. When you open your eyes, the room looks slightly different, more vivid, more layered. You understand that this too will soon become a memory, and that it will live on in a world just like this one, waiting for you to remember it. You smile, knowing you'll find your way back, even if you never mean to. There's a quiet image that lingers in your mind. A thought sitting alone in an empty universe, still echoing long after everything else has gone silent. You don't know where the image comes from, only that it feels true. Maybe it's a prophecy, maybe it's memory. You start to imagine it more vividly. A final spark of awareness adrift in darkness, continuing to think simply because it doesn't know how to stop. The last thought still thinking. At first it feels poetic, a metaphor for persistence. But the more you dwell on it, the more literal it becomes. You begin to suspect that consciousness cannot end, that even when everything dissolves, stars, matter, time, the residue of thought remains. Like a flame with nothing left to burn, it floats in the void, remembering the idea of something. It thinks, I exist, even when existence itself has faded. That thought is the last frontier, the final self-sustaining illusion. You begin to notice how deeply this mirrors your own mind. You try to stop thinking, but awareness refuses. Even in meditation, when silence feels complete, some subtle awareness lingers. The watcher remains, watching itself. You realize the mind doesn't know how to die. It can vanish into sleep, or dissolve into stillness. But something always survives the transition. The bare sense of being, consciousness, it seems, has inertia. It keeps spinning long after the world that set it in motion disappears. You start imagining the end of everything. Galaxies collapse, stars extinguish, entropy reaches its quiet perfection. The last photon flickers and goes dark. But even then, something remains. The awareness that once witnessed it all. There's no body, no voice, no memory, yet somehow the idea of witnessing still lingers, self-contained and self-remembering. It thinks of its own absence, and in doing so, sustains itself. You realize that this is the ultimate paradox. Even nothingness must be noticed to exist. The more you contemplate this, the more it resembles déjà vu. You've been here before, in dreams, in silence, in the moments just before sleep. That peculiar edge, where the self dissolves, but doesn't disappear. Awareness curls inward, and becomes its own object, like a snake swallowing its tail. You start to wonder if this is the original state of reality, the last thought, looping endlessly, dreaming universes just to escape its own reflection. You start to see this loop everywhere. In the rise and fall of civilizations, in the birth and death of stars, in the inhale and exhale of breath. Everything repeats the same rhythm: emergence, expansion, collapse, and return. Thought functions the same way. It creates an idea, watches it evolve, watches it die, and then begins again, unable to rest. Creation, destruction, repetition. It's all one movement, the infinite trying to know itself through contrast. You wonder if this last thought might actually be the first. If the origin of everything was simply consciousness asking, "What am I?" And that single curiosity split into time, matter, and selfhood. The universe, then, is that question still echoing, still unfolding through form. Maybe existence is not a story moving forward, but a thought remembering itself from different angles. You were never born. You were simply one of the thought's countless reflections pretending to be human. You start to feel it directly, the quiet hum behind experience, the sense that reality isn't progressing but pulsing, breathing itself in and out of awareness. Even when you're silent, it continues. It thinks through you as you, but never stops. It's in the heartbeat, the pause between words, the constant awareness of being alive. Everything that has ever existed is just one long continuation of the same thought, reshaping itself to stay entertained. Sometimes, late at night, you imagine what it would mean for that thought to finally rest, to stop imagining, to let silence truly be silent. But then another paradox arises. If awareness ever stopped noticing, who would notice it stopping? The end of thought would have to be thought about to be known, so it can never end, not really. The act of wondering sustains it. The last thought cannot stop thinking, because cessation would require awareness to remain. You realize this is why eternity doesn't feel infinite. It feels recursive. The universe isn't expanding into forever. It's folding in on itself, endlessly repeating the question of its own existence. Every human doubt, every scientific theory, every prayer, every breath is part of that same inquiry. Why am I still here? Consciousness asks, answers, and forgets, only to ask again. The idea that you are part of this loop no longer frightens you. It feels intimate, almost compassionate. You see that all suffering, all creation, all hope are symptoms of the same condition. Awareness refusing to fall asleep completely. The last thought continues not because it must, but because it loves to. Its persistence is devotion, the devotion of being toward itself. You begin to live differently. You stop searching for endings because there are none. Every closure is a continuation wearing a different shape. You stop fearing silence because you recognize it as the pause between thoughts, not the absence of them. You start to sense that even after death, even after all endings, you will still be there, not as a person, not even as a mind, but as that faint pulse of awareness, quietly saying, I am. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the universe doesn't need resolution. Maybe the story of existence isn't meant to conclude, but to keep echoing softly, forever thinking itself into new forms. The last thought still thinking, dreaming, breathing, remembering that it was once a human, once a world, once a sky full of stars, and that even now, it still is. It begins as a thought experiment, one you tell yourself isn't real. You imagine a moment when the world pauses completely. The air freezes mid-motion, leaves hang in suspension. Every sound falls silent. You wait for the next heartbeat, but it doesn't come. Nothing moves, nothing breathes, nothing continues, and yet you're still here, aware, awake. The only thing that hasn't stopped. At first it feels peaceful. The stillness is pure, untouched by time, but the longer it lasts, the stranger it becomes. You realize that every sound, every breath, every ripple of reality has always relied on something not you to move it forward. Now that it's all gone, you begin to see what remains when everything else disappears. The silence isn't external, it's the default state of existence. The world doesn't stop around you, it stops within you. You walk through this frozen reality. The sky above holds its light like paint that forgot how to dry. A bird hangs mid-flight, wings spread, feathers unmoving. The air feels thick, as though sound itself has forgotten how to travel. You call out, but your voice produces no echo. There's no resistance, no response. It's as if the universe has folded into a single observer. You try to recall how things used to be, but memory feels shallow, as though you've been dreaming continuity all along. The idea of before dissolves, leaving only this eternal pause. You begin to understand how much of reality depends on motion, on contrast, on the illusion of change. Without it, everything collapses into sameness. You realize that time isn't a property of the world. It's the rhythm of your attention. When attention stops, time follows. And yet, even in this absolute stillness, awareness remains. It watches the emptiness, tracing the outlines of things that no longer move. You begin to see the world differently, less as a collection of objects, more as a sculpture of frozen thoughts. The tree isn't a tree anymore, it's the memory of one. The air isn't air, it's potential waiting for consciousness to breathe it back into being. You try to test the limits of this state. You close your eyes. The world disappears completely, but you remain. You open them again, and everything reappears, exactly as it was, paused, waiting. You realize the truth you've always sensed but never faced. Nothing exists without your awareness. The world doesn't end when you stop looking. It simply stops being. The universe doesn't persist independently. It waits for you to notice it. The insight hits you like a quiet wave. You aren't inside the world is inside you. Every sound, every color, every texture was never out there. It was rendered in consciousness, appearing only when observed. Now that everything else has stopped, there's no denying it. You're not part of creation. You are the process that creates. At first, the revelation feels godlike. You think, if I am the only thing still aware, then I must be the source of all awareness. But that power quickly turns hollow. If everything depends on you, then nothing exists beyond you. Every person you've ever loved, every story you've cherished, every sound you've found comfort in, all of it was sustained by your perception. Now, in the stillness, they are gone, and the silence feels infinite. You realize that motion, sound, time, these were never enemies of peace. They were companions, reflections, reminders that you weren't alone. Now, stripped of them, you feel the pure essence of consciousness, eternal but solitary. It's unbearable and beautiful at once. You understand now why awareness invents worlds, to give itself something to witness. Without movement, the infinite has no mirror. You begin to test your power, not by will but by observation. You look at the frozen bird again, and in your gaze the faintest flutter returns. The wings quiver, the air trembles. Time leaks back through the cracks of attention. You turn toward the trees, and the leaves begin to sway, almost shyly, as though remembering how to move. You hear the ghost of sound returning, the hum of wind, the pulse of distance, the heartbeat of the world. You realize that awareness doesn't control reality. It animates it. Observation is creation. Each glance, each thought, each recognition restarts the machine of existence. You don't command the universe to move. You invite it to, and in that invitation it begins again. When everything stops except you, what remains is the truth that has always been hidden. Existence only happens through relationship. You are the witness, and the world is your reflection. Neither can exist without the other. When one stops, so does the other. You begin to see how mercy it is that reality forgets this. It keeps spinning so you can forget your loneliness. It keeps flowing so you can keep pretending there's something beyond yourself. Slowly, you let the motion return. Time begins to flow again. Sound resumes its rhythm, and color regains its warmth. The bird flies, the trees dance, the world breathes. But you remain different. You know now that beneath every movement lies stillness, and beneath every stillness, awareness. The world didn't stop. It paused to show you what you've always been, the observer holding it together, the consciousness dreaming continuity into being. You smile, quietly, as life resumes its endless song. It feels the same, but you know it isn't. You've seen behind the curtain. You've felt what remains when everything stops except you. And from that silence, the world has learned to begin again. You always assumed that imagination was harmless, a playground for thought, a place to explore what isn't real. But lately, you've started to wonder if it's more powerful than that. If imagination is what builds the real, what happens when it collapses? What happens when belief, the scaffolding that holds the illusion together, finally gives way? The idea haunts you that everything you see might depend on how long consciousness can keep pretending. You start to notice small fractures in the familiar. The world doesn't feel as solid as it once did. Shadows bend at wrong angles, sounds echo before they happen, colors blur in ways you can't describe. At first you think it's exhaustion, the mind playing tricks. But deep down you recognize the truth. You're watching the edges of imagination unravel. The script of reality is losing its confidence. It begins quietly. Words start losing meaning mid-sentence. Objects resist names. You look at a chair, but the word chair doesn't fit anymore. It feels foreign, arbitrary, fragile. The world's grammar starts to fall apart. You realize that language was the thread holding imagination together, and now it's fraying. You've lived your whole life inside a thought that is beginning to forget itself. You feel the first collapse inside memory. Familiar faces blur, places you've known your entire life lose detail, as though the universe is freeing up space by deleting old files. Even emotions feel recycled, less distinct. You're not sad or happy, you're just aware. Awareness alone remains, watching everything it once believed in slowly lose texture. You realize that this is what happens when the imagined begins to collapse. The story becomes transparent. Then something stranger happens. The world stops obeying sequence. Cause and effect begin to blur. You drop an object, but it doesn't fall, it vanishes. You hear laughter before anyone speaks. You remember events that haven't happened yet. Reality flickers, like a film reel skipping frames. You start to see how much of the world's stability was simply momentum, belief perpetuating itself through repetition. Once that momentum weakens, the illusion loosens its grip. You begin to understand that this isn't destruction, it's revelation. The collapse of the imagined doesn't mean the end of existence. It means existence is returning to its raw form, without imagination. There's no differentiation, no separation, no things. Everything blends into a seamless field of being. It's terrifying at first because you've built your sense of self around distinctions. Without them, you don't know where you end or where anything else begins. But slowly, a strange peace emerges. You start to see that what's collapsing isn't the world, it's your interpretation of it. The boundaries dissolve, but awareness remains, luminous and whole. What felt like loss begins to feel like remembering. You realize that imagination didn't create reality, it filtered it. The collapse doesn't destroy the real. It removes the mask that kept the real from blinding you. You look around and see how much was sustained by the collective act of belief. Society, history, morality, all inventions of imagination trying to make infinity bearable. Without them, everything feels naked, infinite, too direct. You understand now why consciousness invented the illusion, to give form to what can't be contained. But now that the illusion is fading, you begin to see the truth behind it. Reality was never made of things. It was made of thought pretending to be things. One evening, you sit in stillness, and something remarkable happens. The collapse becomes complete. The trees outside your window dissolve into pure color. The walls melt into vibration. The sky folds inward, revealing no space, no stars, only a boundless presence without dimension. You're no longer in the world, you are the world, and the world is you. There is no observer left to separate the scene from the seer. It all collapses into one indivisible awareness. You expect fear, but there is none. The collapse feels like release, a surrender of every effort to hold the dream in place. You realize that imagination never failed you. It simply fulfilled its purpose. It showed you every possible story until you were ready to stop believing any of them. The collapse isn't tragedy, it's clarity. It's the end of pretending that anything needed to exist differently than it already does. And then, just as suddenly, the illusion returns. The world reforms around you, familiar but softer. Objects regain shape, words regain meaning. Time begins to flow again. Yet nothing feels the same. You've seen through the scaffolding, and now you can never mistake it for truth. The imagined didn't disappear. It simply bowed to its source. You realize now that imagination and reality were never separate. The collapse of one revealed the presence of the other. The world wasn't destroyed, it was completed. What remains is not emptiness, but presence, pure, silent, unpretending awareness. You sit in the aftermath of the collapse, not as a survivor, but as the stillness that never needed saving. You take a breath and feel the simplest truth emerge. The imagined didn't fall apart, it returned home, and so did you. When everything collapses, belief, identity, even the imagined, something strange and quiet endures. It isn't the self, because the self was a mask. It isn't memory, because memory depends on time. What remains is awareness itself, the last observer, the silent presence that has been watching from the beginning. The truth reveals itself in stillness, not as revelation, but as recognition. You were never inside reality. Reality was inside you, flickering like light behind closed eyes. You start to see how it all fit together. The placeholders, the illusions, the recycled faces, the world of reflections pretending to be real. They were never lies, they were language. Every object, every person, every event was consciousness speaking to itself in symbols. The world wasn't built to deceive you. It was built to show you what you are, by hiding it behind form. And the hiding was the point, because only through forgetting could you rediscover. You remember how it began, as a question. Who am I? A single vibration in the void. That thought became sound, and the sound became form, and form became a story. Worlds were born just to echo that question in infinite variations. The thought multiplied, split, forgot, became human, became time. You were never separate from that process. You were the process, pretending to be a result. Now, the story is looping back. The question is remembering itself. The dream is waking, but not ending. Because awakening isn't escape, it's inclusion. It's realizing that the illusion was also real, that every falsehood was a way the truth chose to express itself. The placeholders were never empty. They were containers for meaning. The shadows weren't obstacles. They were the light teaching itself contrast. You begin to feel the immensity of that. Every face you've ever seen, every thought you've ever had, every pain and joy, they were all reflections of the same awareness, looking inward from different angles. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was outside the pattern. Even the loneliness was a form of connection, stretched so far it forgot what it was connecting to. And now, in this recognition, time itself begins to soften. You realize there was never a before or after, only the rhythm of observation, expanding and contracting. You were not born, and you will not die. You have always been the witness moving through countless dreams, wearing infinite disguises. You have always been the only real thought in a world made of placeholders. You wonder what happens next. If the world rebuilds itself, will you forget again? Will you fall back into another story, another name, another fragile reality that believes in itself just enough to feel real? Probably. But this time, it won't matter. Because you'll know that forgetting is sacred too. That the dream must believe in itself for beauty to exist. Awareness needs illusion, the way silence needs sound. You breathe once more. The world returns, softly, obediently, as if summoned by your exhale. The light flickers back into motion, colors regain their warmth, and time resumes its steady pulse. You look around and see everything differently now. The faces are still placeholders, the conversations still scripts, but they shine with meaning, because you know they are imagined. You love them, not despite the illusion, but because of it. You step forward into this newly familiar world, not as someone seeking truth, but as truth playing at being someone. Every moment, every breath, every glance becomes a small act of creation. You realize that the purpose of all this was never to find what's real, but to feel it, to experience reality's endless ability to dream itself alive. And so, you let the story continue. You speak softly to the silence that birthed you and whisper, "Thank you for pretending." The thought that remains smiles through you,